Good crowd.
Yeah.
Good crowd.
Yeah, it's really good.
Very good.
So this is very positive.
Very positive. Very
Afraid
positive.
of lack of people since
No, this is
we've been posted like hell.
This is
They've
brilliant.
Been torn down all the time.
this is brilliant. Well, yeah, that's the game. That's the name. That's terrible. You might tell that to people in the beginning. You might
We usually ask if they've
yeah.
gotten information by Facebook,
Yeah,
email,
yeah.
posters. Or,
Well, you have a good organization to work from, and you have a good track record.
Yeah.
Ready when you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Och det är en stor ära för oss i föreningen Cui Bono att få ha honom här. Så en varm applåd för Christopher Bollyn.
Thank you. Can you all hear me all right? Sound's working. Thank you for coming. It's a nice crowd. It's a great pleasure to be here in Gothenburg. I live in Jönköping, Husqvarna, and I have been an independent journalist for 12 years, since June of 2000. What I want to start by doing is do a little introduction about what this event is going to be. I'm going to talk for about an hour. There will be plenty of time at the end for questions, because in a group like this, questions are one of the most important things. And a little note is that everything that I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to present factual evidence. I will refrain from any speculation or any sort of idle talk. Everything that I show you will be factual information which you could verify for yourself. Because 9/11 is simply too important of an event, too important of a thing, a subject to speculate, to leave to speculation. So the event is, have we been deceived about what happened on September 11th? This is a very, very important question, which is why I'm talking about it 13 years, nearly 13 years later. Because September 11th was an event that changed our world. Whether you're an American or a Swede, a Norwegian, an Israeli, a Palestinian, an Iraqi, anywhere in the world has been fundamentally changed by this event. It was used to usher in, obviously, the war on terrorism, radical changes in the United States of America, and around the world. And Swedes have been very affected by this. Let's see. But I want to start by asking just a very brief straw poll, because I want to get some idea of what you think. Now, don't be afraid. You don't have to raise your hand, or it's completely voluntary. But is there anybody here who, at this point, believes the government version, what the U.S. government has told us about 9/11, that basically it was a terrorist operation done by Osama bin Laden and 19 of his comrades who hijacked the planes and then committed this crime? Does anybody here believe that to be the case, pretty much, at all? You do. You kind of believe that's the case, okay? How many of you would be in the group that would call themselves skeptical? You kind of doubt, you have questions about it, but you're not quite sure. Anybody here just kind of like in that skeptical camp? Okay, a couple, good. And how many of you here belong to the other side of the spectrum? How many of you believe that the US government version and the media version of what happened on September 11th is nothing but a pack of lies? Okay, that's like the majority of you. Good. Well, I want to start by thanking Cui Bono for having me here. Cui Bono, of course, in Latin means who benefits? Who benefits? And it's the typical way that crimes are often solved. You ask, who benefited from the crime? And I want to thank the Föreningen for inviting me here. They invited me here after I had a similar event in Jönköping, Sweden, back in February. And this is a very nice crowd. So I'll talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have questions. Also, I'm the author of a book, Solving 9/11, and if you are interested in more material, you can get the books from my family in the back. Let's see here. Now, my background is an investigative journalist. I'm from Chicago. I was born there. And I was working for IBM in Schaumburg, Illinois, where I'm from. I had a young family. And I was very involved with the Estonia catastrophe because my wife lost a loved one on the Estonia catastrophe in 1994. And I had lived in Sweden. My children were born in Sweden. I have some family connection to Sweden. My mother's father came from Rättvik. And I always saw Sweden as being a country that worked very well. I liked that it was neutral in wars, and that when I would go to the Middle East, I would often find Swedish and Norwegian governments had done good things for like the Palestinian people. They had built a hospital, for example, or they gave real aid to the people. And I thought that was wonderful. And so I was in Sweden when the Estonia sank, the day that it sank, and I became involved in looking at what happened to the Estonia ship. And I realized, I'm not going to talk a great deal about this, but I realized that there was some covering up. Some of the information, what happened to this ship was being pushed under the rug. And I really wanted to investigate it more and write about it. And I wound up being offered a job as a journalist in Washington, D.C. in 2000. And I got involved I was an investigative journalist. That was my job. I wrote for a little paper in Washington, D.C. that was called The Spotlight. And my first big story was the U.S. elections in 2000, which were clearly stolen. They were stolen. And what I discovered, having worked for IBM, I found out that we were now voting on computers. Basically, in Chicago, you would go and fill out a ballot, but the ballot would be counted on a computer. And the computers were being run by a private company. And this was happening all across America. So what happened is, as you remember, in the year 2000, the elections were stolen for George Bush. And in November of 2000, I realized that if private companies are involved in stealing US elections, they're not doing it to put good people in office. And that's when I first realized that we had a very serious problem in the United States with a government that was not accountable to the people. And in January of 2001, they finally made George Bush the president. The Supreme Court just said, stop the counting. George Bush is the president. Then a couple weeks later, Ariel Sharon was elected, became Prime Minister of Israel. And for a person like me who watches the Middle East very closely, this was a very dangerous constellation. This meant that the Likud party was in power in Israel, and we had our American Likud party, if you will, in power in the United States. And it was exactly the same constellation that we had in 1982, when Menachem Begin was in power in Israel, and we had Ronald Reagan in power in the White House. And that brought great problems in the Middle East. That brought the war in Lebanon, terrible, terrible disaster in 1982, Sabra and Shatila and all that. Well, I'm going to go on now to, let's see, I want to show you a few pictures about what happened on 9/11, because I want you to understand, to see these pictures, because they show important information that I will refer to later. So we'll start with this one. This is a photograph in 2007 in Santa Monica, California. And this is to show you just a little idea of the amount of public opinion that is on your side, on our side. These people in California, this is a well-to-do community. You even have a U.S. Marine in there. They say, expose the 9/11 cover-up, demand a new investigation, neocon jobs, Iraq, 9/11. Where they say demand a new investigation, I have to say one thing. This is a very important aspect of 9/11. There has been no investigation. People don't realize that. People think that, like the 9/11 Commission, like the book that this lady's holding, they think that was some sort of investigation. That was not an investigation. That was a political appointed committee that dealt with very specific issues and came out with a crafted document that they had decided they would produce in the way it was produced. It was written by Philip Zelikow. They had a preordained conclusion, and they made the myth. They're actually like the authors of the myth of what happened on 9/11. But that was not an investigation. Then there were the building reports. There was the building reports of what happened to the Twin Towers. They only did an engineering investigation of what the buildings, how the buildings performed up until the point of collapse. And then there was another subsequent investigation, engineering investigation only, of what happened to Building 7 and the Pentagon. But none of these were criminal investigations. When 9/11 happened, 3,000 people were killed. In New York City alone, when the Twin Towers came down, 2,700 people were in those buildings. They all died, of course. So this is a scene of mass murder. And in a scene of mass murder, usually the investigation begins with the evidence. And the evidence from the World Trade Center was composed of basically two physical items. They had the steel and they had the dust. That's all that was left of the World Trade Center. Steel, big piles of steel, rubble steel, and big piles of dust. That was it. And what the United States government did very promptly is they allowed the steel to be treated like recycling. They removed the steel immediately, sent it to 2 junkyards in New Jersey, where it was cut into pieces this short or shorter, mixed with other steel, and put on boats and sent to China, where it was melted down. Now, there's a real question there. At the time when 9/11 happened, the price of scrap steel was the lowest it had been in 50 years. So rather than taking that steel and recycling it in Pennsylvania or Ohio, they put it on ships and sent it to China, where you're paying $25 a ton just to ship it. Why would they do that? This was destruction of evidence. And the destruction of evidence was done by the very people who were in the official positions to investigate it, namely the U.S. Department of Justice, which operates the FBI. The FBI ran the investigation. The FBI was under John Ashcroft. John Ashcroft was the Attorney General, but the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the criminal investigation of terrorism, which is what 9/11 was a man named Michael Chertoff. Who's an Israeli American, as it is. And he is the one who allowed the officials in New York City to take the steel, destroy it, and get rid of it. So let's just look at these. I want to show that this shows you that there's a lot of people out there. We're a small group here, but for every one of us, there's hundreds of people in our countries who are demanding the truth. They understand that this is a very, very important subject. These are the 2 books that I wrote. The Deception that changed, Solving 9/11, The Deception that Changed the World, is my thesis, basically, which is the concise explanation of my whole working thesis that I developed over a period of 10 years. And the original articles is the articles that I wrote, because I was a working journalist, and I began writing. We happened to be in New York City on 9/11, passing through New York City, and it was just up my alley. I began writing about it right away, and I wrote a lot in 2001, 2002, et cetera, et cetera. Year after year, I continued my investigation. Some years I wrote less, some years I wrote more, and then things really started heating up in 2005. We'll get back to that, what happened in 2005, 2006, a little bit later. All of you should have something like this in your hands. There were envelopes given at the door for people who came, and what this is Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. This is a group that started in San Francisco, California. The group is composed of about 3,000 engineers and architects in the United States, the people who build these buildings. And I wanted everybody to have this document and the material that's in this envelope, because these people are professionals. They build these buildings. They understand the physics at work. They understand the laws of nature. They know what buildings do when they burn. They know what the forces are involved. And there are, as I said, about 3,000 architects and engineers in the United States who are demanding an investigation, because they tell you that, for example, Building 7, the third building that fell that day, did not fall from fire. Actually, none of the buildings fell from fire. These towers, the 3 towers that collapsed, that's why they have 3 streams of light here, 1 and 2 and 7. But 7 is a building that fell at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was 47 stories tall, and it was about a block away from the North Tower. It had fires in it. It had burned. But at 5:20 in the afternoon, people came out of the building and they said, "Get back, everybody, get back, it's going to come down, get back." And sure enough, it came down. The owner of the building was Larry Silverstein. And he said that, we decided to pull it, and then we watched it come down. The expression pull it is an expression that's used in demolition. When you're going to pull a building, you pull it down. You put charges in it, you knock out the core columns, and the building falls. And as we know with buildings towers 1, 2, and 7, they all fell at free fall speed. The 2 giant towers fell in less than 11 seconds. And that's a 415-meter building falling down. That means that there was nothing stopping it. That means that the cold structure below the impact zone provided no resistance. I'm really glad to be speaking in a place where Niels Harrit has already spoken here, and Niels Harrit has talked about in greater detail about what they found. But clearly, as the architects and engineers material will tell you, the official version of what happened to towers 1, 2, and 7 is simply not believable. It's not possible. So, what did happen? This is impact of South Tower. This is a few milliseconds after the plane struck the South Tower. This is the second building that's struck. I just want you to notice a couple things here. You see that there's explosions going off, and pieces of the building are being thrown out. This first part here, where you see this white cloud, that's the entry. That's where the plane went in. And you see that there is a very white cloud coming out with a very light orange flame. You see that very light orange flame? That's important to note, because that is not kerosene. When kerosene burns jet fuel, it burns a darker orange, more like you see over there to the far end. What we see with the black smoke coming out here on this side and the dark flame, the dark yellow-orange flame, that's kerosene. The question is, what's exploding in the entry wound? What is it? The plane has just gone into the building at about 450, 500 miles an hour, they say, and we're seeing a huge blast coming out of the entry wound. And this, I would submit, is the white smoke is very indicative of thermite, just as you understand. When thermite detonates, thermite is an incendiary. It's made out of aluminum and iron oxide. When it detonates, any version of that detonates, you're going to get white smoke, which is aluminum oxide, incredible heat release, and molten iron. Those are the byproducts. And we certainly got a lot of molten iron, but we'll get to that later. But this white smoke is very suspicious, and when they use these kinds of things in Hollywood, when they make a movie, they use thermite, variations of thermite, as incendiaries to create the spectacle. When you see those Hollywood movies, that's often thermite bombs going off. and they add, for example, barium. A little bit of barium will give you an nice orange flame like that. So they can add different things to the mixture to get different results. Here's the North Tower. It's a very interesting photograph because the plane has just gone into this side that we see here. And look at what we see coming out the back of the building here on this side. It looks like a cotton bale. It looks like a big bale of cotton. Pure white smoke. There's no explanation for that. If that's the plane's fuel burning, there's no explanation for what's causing that large white cloud there. And then there's a very important detail. Both planes flew into computer rooms, secure computer rooms. Say, for example, if this room we're in right now is a computer room full of gigantic servers, full of computer stuff, locked all the time, only certain people get in there, but both planes went into computer rooms. Now this is, I think, very interesting because if these planes were being remotely guided, if they were like missiles, the computer would be telling the plane, come here, come here, come here, and the plane would be saying, I'm coming, I'm coming, I'm coming. And it's like a guided missile. That's possible. That's certainly possible. This particular impact went into Marsh & McLennan. Marsh & McLennan is a company owned formerly by Maurice Greenberg. And it's interesting that the man who was working for this company was, of course, very much involved. Maurice Greenberg was very much involved in the bailout, the AIG bailout that came in 2008, 2009. Bremer. One of the people from Marsh & McLennan became the American envoy to Iraq. His name was Louis Bremer, Jerry Louis Bremer. He was, if you remember, when the Americans took over Iraq, they sent over a civilian man to run the country. We call him like a proconsul. He came from this company, this very company. And another thing is that this company, Marsh & McLennan, and they had another company that was responsible for security at the World Trade Center. Since 1993, when they had the first bombing in the World Trade Center, Kroll and Associates, which is associated with this company, they had security. They ran security at the World Trade Center. I put this photograph in here because this shows you the difference. This is the South Tower. The plane has come like this, entered from this side, gone out this side. Just to show you the difference in the smoke and the flames. The dark stuff, the sooty smoke, that's the jet fuel burning. Most of the jet fuel burned on impact like this. And this explosion here coming out, I would submit that that's thermite. And that both computer rooms had pre-placed thermite in them. So that when the plane hit, you got this big spectacular explosion. And you understand, if this is thermite burning, extremely hot temperatures, so that anything that goes into that ball of fire will be basically destroyed. There will be no evidence. Everything will be melted because the temperatures that are achieved in such huge thermite explosions burn everything up. There's nothing left. And we saw there was very little left of the airplanes. Now, as we see 45 minutes later, an hour later, the tower's pulverized. What we all saw, anybody who looks at these images saw, was that the towers began to demolish from the top down. There were people there who felt explosions in the basements, eyewitnesses. When the planes hit, experienced explosions in the basement. As William Rodriguez, who was the janitor in the World Trade Center, said, there was explosions in the basement before the plane hit. So there were bombs going off. And the BBC had Stephen Evans there, Stephen Evans was there, their journalist. He was at the World Trade Center. On September 11th, when he was on BBC World News, he was an eyewitness, and he talked about the series of explosions that he felt and saw at the World Trade Center before the buildings collapsed. Then they turned down his mic. And then they said, well, tell us, what did you see? And they turned his mic back up again, and he went on again about this series of explosions that he saw. He said, we have no idea the human damage, the human cost of these explosions. He never talked about that subject again. Only the first day he talked about it, then obviously the people in London at BBC said, please don't talk about explosions anymore. And this is what we saw all across the media. People who were there talked about explosions. Eyewitnesses talked about explosions. My first article was about eyewitness explosions because it was even printed in the American newspapers and American magazines. Firefighters who went in the buildings saw explosions. Firefighters died in the buildings from explosions. In the basement, in the lobby, on ground level. It was just big explosions. What caused that? Well, then we saw these towers basically demolish into dust. We call this pulverization, because each floor was the size of 1 American acre, which is about 220 feet by 220 feet, something like that. And each floor was 4 inches thick, about 10 centimeters of lightweight concrete, which was held in a steel pan. All of that material was pulverized. You didn't see, for example, if you see an earthquake in Turkey and these buildings come down, you see a level of pancakes, floor after floor after floor, all pancaked on top of each other. You might see it. It's a terrible thing to see, but that's what happens to tall buildings. When they pancake, they fall down, and you have like a stack of pancakes. Nothing like that happened at the World Trade Center. Every single floor was destroyed, turned into dust, and that dust was spread all over Manhattan and into the ocean around Manhattan, and some of it went to Brooklyn. And in some places, the level of dust was like after a snowfall. You would get people, there would be dust this deep in streets in New York. Here you see some of the columns falling. Now, what's important to understand about these World Trade Centers is one important thing to understand. They were very, very strongly built buildings. They were the biggest buildings in the world when they were built in the late 60s, early 70s, and they were overbuilt. They had 47 core columns, and the core columns were, shaped like a big box. And those were in the middle of the building. And that was the core. And then there were peripheral columns around on the outside walls. There were like 220 of those columns. And each face of the building had windows. They were basically windows. The windows were 2 feet wide, and in between each 2-foot window was 1-foot beam. Okay? So that means that 66% of each side of the building was glass, interrupted by 33%, each column, so that then you realize that those planes that hit the buildings basically hit glass. And they would have the planes could easily have passed into the building because where the glass is, they just went right in through the glass, and those columns would have severed. The columns would have severed the plane into pieces, would have chopped it like in slices. Here you see again. Now the question is, what is causing the energetic explosions we're seeing here? You see the width of the building is, you consider again, the building is about, 66 meters wide. Each face of the building is 66 meters wide. And you see that pieces of steel, these are heavy pieces of steel, are being thrown that much outside the building. That means that there's incredible energy forcing those things out of the building. This is not just a collapse. This is not just a gravity collapse. If this was a gravity collapse, things would be going down. But something is throwing steel and dust and with great velocity sideways. This is a pretty good indication that there was explosives in the building. Just to give you an idea, this is taken from the New York police helicopter. These images came out a few years later after 9/11 because they show you the extent of this pulverization. This is what happened to the concrete from the World Trade Center. Each building had 110 floors. The floor pans, the floors, and everything on the floors was turned into dust. That means also the 2,700 people that were in the building. Virtually all of those 2,700 people were turned into dust. Nothing was found out of most of them. A few people the very, very lowest floors were found, but everything else above was pulverized. So that means, of course, that this was a hideous act of mass murder. Absolutely hideous. Here's to show you what some people say, oh, it was nuclear explosions and there was no steel left. No, there was a lot of steel left. This is just, there were mountains of steel. And this is the people who were involved in removing the steel from the World Trade Center, the man whose company was in charge of basically taking the steel and chopping it up, said that all that was remaining from the World Trade Center was dust and steel. That's all. And you see, here they have lots of dust, but nothing, I mean, lots of steel, but there was, in this pile, there were no toilets, there were no desks, there were no computers. I mean, they only found very small pieces of things. They found pieces of computer, like they found the hard disk. And they would take that hard disk and send it to Germany to have the data, find out what that computer, was left of that computer. And they were able to find it, actually. They were able to retrieve a lot of the data. This shows you the box columns. These box columns that are behind these firefighters are the core columns. There were 47 in each tower, just like the one that you see behind the firefighter. Behind this firefighter here, this is very early on. This is when they're still looking for their buddies. The firefighters are a fraternity, and they want to find the missing firefighters who died that day. Hundreds of firefighters died. And so they were looking in the rubble. This is before any of the removal of the rubble began. And if you see on this is a very interesting photograph because it shows that the big box column behind this firefighter has been cut with what looks like a thermite charge. You can see that those box columns, they were built in Japan because they were so large and they could only do it in Japan. And at the time, at the base of the building, at the very base, the walls of the box columns were 10 centimeters wide. The walls of the steel, see, so that box column there is pretty close near the bottom because you can see the thickness. You see the thickness of the walls of that column are every bit of 4 inches. And then as the columns got higher and higher in the building, so that it would be less, you can't have such heavy stuff at the top, they were only a 1/4 inch thick. So they tapered. The wall of the box column went from 4 inches to a 1/4 inch. As it got thinner, as it got to the top, it got much thinner. Because these were the load-bearing columns. These are the columns that held up buildings. And as you can see, if you want to bring down a tower, and the tower is held up by 47 core columns, those columns have to be cut. Question is, how were they cut? Well, this one was certainly cut by something that caused melting of the steel. Here's a very interesting photograph. This is from a video. This is why it's a little bit, it's from a TV video in New York City. This is South Tower. This is about 5-10 minutes before the building came down. And what we see coming out of this building is molten iron. You see that like a volcano pouring off the 81st floor. It looks like what happened is that the 81st floor broke, tilted down, and that this molten iron found a way. There was obviously a big pool of it. This is what we're seeing right here is several cubic meters of molten iron. This is not aluminum. In some places, like in the government document, they refer to this as aluminum. But aluminum at this temperature is silver, not this color. So this is most likely iron. So what caused a gigantic pool of molten iron? This is basically at the impact level. This is basically where the plane came out this side. The plane came out this end, and we see some items, some objects from the plane, or what hit the building, come out very fast off this side of the building. If you ever look at the video of this, you will see when the South Tower is hit, look and see what comes out the other side. 2 items come out very fast. One is burning white hot, and the other one is burning a normal color. The one that's burning white hot is leaving behind a dark trail of smoke. but only a few feet behind the item itself. This I submit is probably depleted uranium, because depleted uranium is used by the Americans in missiles all the time. It cuts through anything. It cuts through steel. It goes right through steel. And it's pyrophoric, means that it's burning in the air. So when the Americans or the military fires depleted uranium missiles at, for example, a tank, that missile will go right through the tank. Never mind how strong the tank is. It goes right into the tank, and then the depleted uranium is burning white hot inside the tank, and it bounces around inside the tank, incinerating everything in the tank. So anything that's in that tank is just turned into charcoal. There will be nothing left from the tank. And this is what America has been using in Yugoslavia, in Iraq, and in Afghanistan. And a lot of times they actually hit their own people. And these tanks, these items, these vehicles are then very, very toxic. So what the United States has been doing, Raytheon Company, they take these destroyed trucks and cars and tanks, they take them to the Pacific Ocean and to the Marshall Islands and dump them in the ocean, try to create a reef. But a couple of my readers were working on this, and they got very, very sick, because just to come into contact with these vehicles that have been hit by uranium is deadly. So another thing that you consider about this, at this point we still have people above this. If you go to a sauna, you know that a very hot sauna is about 100 degrees Celsius. This 80th floor, 81st floor of this tower is at least 1,200 degrees Celsius, at least. And if this molten iron is a product of a thermitic reaction, that means that this temperature was 2,000 degrees, 2,500 degrees Celsius. That explains why the people that were trapped in the floors above the impact zone, when they're on the phone, they say, "It's very hot in here. It's very, very hot. I can't," because they were literally being cooked alive. Because the temperature of this thermite is so hot, anybody in the floors just above this would be dead already. You can't endure such heat. And this heat would go up through the buildings. They would go through the elevator shafts. So that heat at this floor would go right up that elevator shaft and come out up, in the floors above. So this is why the people were suffering so much. This is another image of this. It's like a volcano of molten iron. Here, this is from the United States Geological Survey of the Dust. This is a very hard document to get, but I was working with Professor Jones when we were first looking into this thermite, and he said, "Christopher, can you get me some of the dust? Can you get some of the dust from the World Trade Center?" I said, "I don't know if I can get dust," but I went out to California, to Davis, California, and I found the book that the United States Geological Survey had written, a little booklet of papers about the dust. So the United States Geological Survey had done a survey of papers, and they published these papers. The main characteristic of the dust of the World Trade Center is these what's called iron-rich spheres. This is like smaller than a millimeter. This is maybe a half a millimeter or a tenth of a millimeter. Very, very small. But what this is in all the dust, there were these tiny balls of molten iron. This is an iron-rich sphere. That means that the demolition of the World Trade Center was accompanied by large amounts of molten iron. Now, the government cannot explain this. The government version cannot explain why there's molten iron in the dust, because nothing in the government version can account for such high temperatures. Burning jet fuel cannot do it. So this is where this is a similar sphere. This is molybdenum. This is you can make another kind of thermate out of molybdenum. As you will see here, I'm just showing you this picture. This is, when we talk about thermite, we're talking about something called aluminothermics. It's a reaction when you mix aluminum. Aluminum is a very volatile metal. When you combine aluminum with other metals and make a thermite product, this shows you the energy release. The top bar is aluminum mixed with molybdenum, which is that previous sphere. Then we have with nickel, with Teflon, and then the bottom one is, I think it's potassium chlormanganate or something. It's just another one. But you see, the military, this is from the US military. This is from the Department of Energy. DOD in the bottom corner says DOD Energetics. The US military makes this stuff. They make it in Livermore Lab. They make these kinds of products because they want to find what product they can use that will create the biggest bang. That's what people in the military kind of like, that's the kind of research they do. What is the most powerful explosive they can make? Well, this is what they found in the dust of the World Trade Center. This is a form of thermite. Thermite is just a generic term. This is actually a nanocomposite of thermite. Nanotechnology is when you take elements and at a very, very, very small, almost molecular size, smaller than 1/10 of a micron in size, and you mix them. And when you create something with nanotechnology, the reaction is exponentially stronger than it is when it's like sand. Usually thermite, what they use on railroad tracks and things, is kind of like a powder. It's a powder of rust and a powder of aluminum. And they ignite it, and they melt the track together. And they smooth it out, you melt the track together. It's in Germany and Sweden, you use it all the time. But when you mix it at a nano level, at a very, very, very small level, then the explosive potential is as much greater, much faster. So some people will say, oh, Bollyn's talking, they're talking about thermite. Thermite's an incendiary. Thermite's not an explosive. Well, this is because when this reaction occurs, it happens very fast, very powerful, and this is a bilayered material. One layer is the thermitic layer. The other layer is an organic layer. The organic layer creates the gas. That's the explosive. Okay. Here we have, again, just an idea of the extent of the pulverization. Then when they started removing things, when they started pulling the rubble away, they started, they found that the rubble was extremely hot. And they would come down there and they'd find, here, this piece is dripping. They've moved some of taken some stuff away, and they come to this red hot, yellow hot iron. And this is, when they finally got down to the bottom, when they finally took away all the rubble, and they were 7 floors down on the bedrock of Manhattan, they found molten iron in the molten state. That means that for months and months, this rubble had cooked at extremely hot temperature and produced this blue smoke. This kind of smoke you see here, this is extremely toxic smoke, because the fire is so hot, it's producing tiny, tiny particles. And if you breathe this kind of smoke, those particles will pass throughout your system because they're so small. And they will get to the cell, they get to the nucleus of the cell, and they cause these terrible cancers that people are dying from in the United States. The people who were first responders, the firefighters, the policemen, all the people who worked on the pile, they inhaled this stuff. Even if you had the very best respirator, it won't stop it. So it's a very, very risky thing to do, to work on this pile, like you see. And constantly, they were dousing with water. 24 hours a day, they were pouring water on the fire. But it didn't get cooler. See, this firefighter here, he has no protection at all for his lungs. Here just gives you an idea of the temperatures. These are showing some of the sites of 1, 2, and 7. 7 is at the top. That's the third tower that fell. That's at the very top. You see very hot temperatures there too as well. And then in between there's building 6 where there's the big hole. There's a big hole in that building. That's another very, very strange thing about World Trade Center 6 is that there seems to have been a terrible explosion in that building before either tower fell. That's the U.S. Customs House. That's where they have all the evidence of crimes, big crimes, and they have a lot of gold there too. This gives you just an idea of the layout of the buildings: South Tower, North Tower, Building 7. These are the 3 towers that fell that day. Never before has a tower fallen from fire. On that day, 3 of them did. Here we have Building 7. Recently, this architects and engineers did public relations exercise, and they put up advertisements in Times Square telling people about this third tower that fell, because about 43%, about half the American population, did not even know that this building fell at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's interesting that that same percentage of people who don't know about this building believe the government version, which shows you that the percentage of people who have very little understanding of what happened on 9/11 is about the same as the number of people who believe the government version. It works inversely. The more you learn, the more you understand about what happened on 9/11, the less likely you are to believe the government version. Here's the man who basically owned all three buildings. His name is Larry Silverstein. He was indicted for a large drug conspiracy. That case was dismissed. It involved Bill Clinton, actually, as well. And this man's basic claim to fame before becoming the owner of the World Trade Center, he actually leased it. He didn't own it. He leased it. He owned Building 7. He leased the other two buildings. He got the lease for the Twin Towers on July 26th. So about 5 weeks before the buildings fell down, he got the lease. He borrowed money, got the lease, and he won. He sued for billions of dollars. He got billions of dollars from this. So now he's the guy who owns the Freedom Tower, the big Freedom Tower. But this is what he said on public television. He says, I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made the decision to pull, and we watched the building collapse. Conspiracy theorists, people have said, well, this man is basically acknowledging that they authorized the demolition of his tower. And that's people who, that's basically what he's saying. Okay, there were a couple other things that happened on 9/11, obviously. The Pentagon. This is a very important photograph. There's others like this. We're told that a large Boeing 757 came in, flew across the grass, basically, at grade level. They say at grade. That means at grass level. Hit the building, and then the building collapsed. Part of the building collapsed. Now, the Pentagon has walls. The exterior walls of the Pentagon are about a meter wide, thick. It's about a meter thick. Concrete, brick. Here we see these spools. You see the spools? These spools here of holding cable, those spools are about this tall. They're like 7 feet, 8 feet tall. And they were doing construction work there. Now, if the plane came in at grade level and hit the building, where's the plane? You would expect to see some of the plane on the grass. And if the plane came in at grade level, those spools shouldn't be there. I mean, either the plane would have hit the spools, but they seem to be standing there. Nothing hit them. And you don't see anything of the plane. This is before the building collapsed. 45 minutes later, the building came down. Again, here we see. We're told that a Boeing 757 hit this building, but you don't see any evidence of it. Furthermore, when they removed the evidence from this building, we saw nothing of an airplane. You would have jet engines. You would have just the jet engines alone are 3 meters high. Just the engines, the landing gear. None of that survived. None of that was ever seen at the Pentagon. So we're told to believe something that we can't see with our own eyes. Now, this is the exit hole at the Pentagon. After going through 3 rings of the Pentagon, there are concentric rings in the Pentagon. After going through 3 rings of the Pentagon, something came out of this hole, very hot, and this is all that we see. This is inside the Pentagon. This is an exterior wall outside the Pentagon, in the middle of it, in the C ring. This photograph was taken by the FBI. One little note about this is that the engineers who wrote the report about the Pentagon were not allowed to go to this part at all. This entire section where this hole is and the part of the Pentagon before this ring was barricaded off, and no engineers were allowed to go there, only FBI. So you can see that the investigation, the official investigation, was all very, very much contained. Here's what this is the NIST government document telling us, National Institute of Standards and Technology. They're telling us what basically happened. Those little colorful boxes there are columns. Those are columns that are inside the building of the Pentagon. And we're told that the plane came in, like at that grade level, and that it passed all the way through, and that the fuselage of the plane made that hole in the wall that I showed you there. But there's a problem with this because it means that it would have had to go through columns that are still standing. So that's and the third event, of course, is Shanksville, Pennsylvania, deep in the countryside in Pennsylvania. Very few people live there. It's very rural. We're told that this is from History Channel. We're told that the plane crashed here. There's a little gash in this big green field here is actually a reclaimed mine. It's not a field. It was a mine before, and when they reclaim a mine, they've strip mined. They've taken everything out of there. Then when they want to reclaim it, they dump a bunch of junk in there. In this case, they put a bunch of old Coca-Cola machines and Pepsi-Cola machines. Then they put a little bit of soil on top of it and say, okay, it's reclaimed. But you really can't do much with it. You can't farm it or anything like that. But this is where this little hole here in the field, just in front of the forest, that's where they said the plane crashed. But the FBI was doing all of its work about 120 meters, 200 meters into the woods. All the recovery was going on in the woods. And again, the man who owns this mine, I talked to him, and I said, he lent the equipment. He lent the big machines that the FBI was using. He said, the FBI won't let anybody go there, but they're using my machines. He gave the excavators and the bulldozers to the FBI, and only the FBI was allowed to go into this woods section here. There's a family there called the Hoover family, and Mr. Hoover is a Lutheran minister, upright fella. And his son, Barry, had a cabin, and their cabins were basically destroyed. Something terrible happened, and their houses were like turned inside out, and they were not allowed to go there anymore. Only the FBI was able to go in there. And I asked Mr. Hoover a couple years ago, back in 2011, I said, Mr. Hoover, this is the minister, I said, why have you not come forward and told the people that the crash site is actually in the woods? The whole American nation, the whole world is told that the plane crashed in this little hole, yet all of the bodies and the luggage and all the stuff was found hundreds of feet, hundreds of yards in the wood. And he said, well, I wanted to cooperate. Because if you understand, if you talk to the people who were exposed to these events, they were talked to by the FBI agents, and the FBI agents basically told, like the coroner, the local coroner in this county. In Pennsylvania, the coroner is the man who's supposed to be in charge of the accident scene. The accident scene in Pennsylvania belongs to the county coroner. In this case, the FBI went up to the coroner and said, are you going to be a team player? Basically, the coroner then gave the FBI the scene of the accident, the entire scene, for themselves to investigate, and he went and sat 6 miles away and just met families. And he just was like the public relations guy. But his obligation is to find the dead bodies, identify the bodies, and sign a death certificate. And I know this man. I called him a couple years ago, and I said, Wally, don't you feel badly about signing death certificates for people whose bodies you never saw? And he got very upset by that question. But that's what happened. All of the bodies that were taken, all of the human remains that were found in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, were found in the woods. They were all picked up and taken to Dover Air Force Base in Dover, Delaware. And as we now know, many of them were basically just put in a landfill. The bodies were just put into a garbage dump. It's a big scandal in America today about that, but it's the military. Here's the hole. I spoke to the girl who came to this hole, was the first person to this is what we're told. This is what we're told is the place where the plane crashed. And I talked to the girl who worked just about 100 meters away, and she ran down to they heard this big bomb. It was sounded like an atomic bomb. And she ran to there and she said, it's about as big as my little trailer in her front yard, about 7 meters long, 7 meters wide, and a couple meters deep. It looks a little bit bigger because the people are standing behind it. But this is just this very small hole, and as Wally, the coroner, said too, there was no evidence of a plane or bodies or anything in this hole. So what caused this hole? Here, another photograph. Again, the rescue or the people are behind in the woods, closer to the woods, so it looks bigger than it really is. It's only about 8 meters across. And it's a very interesting hole, because this hole looks like it was made by a air-to-ground missile. There were people who were in Shanksville that day, in this little part of the woods, and they all reported seeing a military jet flying around in circles before anything happened. And they described it as like a US A-10 Thunderbolt. It's a it's a ground combat plane. And it looks like a plane like that fired a missile just at the ground, and it created this little hole in the ground. And we're told that this is where the plane went in. We're told that the plane was flying like upside down, this big 757, and went into the ground. And when I went to the local paper and I spoke to the man who's supposed to answer questions like this, he's actually U.S. Army personnel, he told me that the plane came down at a very high speed into the mine, and that the ground liquefied. The ground liquefied, and the plane just went into the ground, and that's it. But he said one wing bounced off the ground and went about half a mile in the woods. I mean, this is pure fairy tale. This is just, you know, they think that we're absolutely idiots that we would believe this. But this is exactly this is the only story you hear in America from the media. The US media and the world media will only tell you this story. They won't tell you none of the questions that I ask are even discussed in the US media 13 years later, not even discussed. What's interesting is that the trench of that picture was pre-existing. The top picture is 1994, shows that this was a trench that it looks like they burned stuff in there or something. They had a trench, and they did something with it. But then the pilot apparently fired the missile into this trench, like he just put his sights on that trench and said, yeah, put the missile right there. It looked like an airplane. That's what they did. This is just some 9/11 people. This is in San Francisco. This is, again, my book. Okay, and that wraps up the picture section. I just wanted to show you those pictures. Does anybody have any questions yet? Anybody have any questions from the pictures that they'd like to ask? Okay, then we'll. Now, why are we talking about September 11th, 13 years later? Why does it matter? Because September 11th was the seminal event of our time. It changed our relationship to our countries, to our nations, to our states. It changed the relationship of our governments to us, the media, everything. Our world is a different place. And fundamentally, it ushered in the global war on terror. And the global war on terror has two aspects. One aspect is the war against Islam, the war against the Arab world, the war against third world countries. And the other aspect is the domestic police state. You see it much less in Sweden than in the United States. But in the United States, the 9/11 was a catalyst that allowed a pre-existing law, a book of laws. Michael Chertoff brought to the United States people a law called USA Patriot Act. That's an acronym. It doesn't mean anything about patriot. But it created all kinds of new agencies. It created a police state apparatus so that in the United States today, if you want to fly, you have to submit yourself to a full body scan, basically a full body X-ray, which is very dangerous, bad for your health. And you have to submit to understanding that your telephone calls, emails are being listened to by the National Security Agency. The relationship of the American people to their government has changed completely as a result of this event. So, but when you understand that the Patriot Act was written before, then you understand that 9/11 was basically just the catalyst. It was what they needed to bring this war to happen. They already had planned a war in Iraq. They'd already planned a war in Afghanistan. This was all planned. They had already planned to bring in this TSA and all these things in the United States of America that we have now. It was all planned. They just needed the thing to make it happen. That's what 9/11 was. It was the thing that made all that happen. Okay, and then in this war, of course, the entire world is the battlefield. After 9/11, Congress passed a law called the the Use of Force Act, and it gave the President Bush at that time the right to wage war anywhere in the world, at any time, in any place. And this is basically the law that the use of force doctrine that Obama uses as he signs off on killing people. Every week, he signs off on targeted killings. Yeah?
Actually, during the 1990s,
Yes.
China and Russia had fairly good cooperated against terror.
Yeah.
And they were quite successful.
Yeah, well, let's take the questions afterwards. But what's very interesting is that this war on terrorism was, as you say, was being incubated in the 70s. There was an institute in Israel called the Netanyahu Institute, run by the family of the Prime Minister today. And they had conferences on terrorism, and they had this idea that we will fight a war on terrorism. And what the Israeli doctrine basically said was that terrorism is a scourge of the modern world. Not that anything happens to Israel because of political grievances between the Palestinians and the Israelis, but that it's a problem. And the solution is to get all the Western democracies to wage war on those countries that support terrorism, which is what we have today. And of course, you all know that Sweden has 500 men in Afghanistan. And that means that for every 500 men in Afghanistan, there are people who have been there before, who are being recycled, so it means thousands of Swedes have been in Afghanistan. Norwegians, Danes, Germans, everybody is involved in this war. But if what happened on 9/11, if the government version of what happened on 9/11 is not true, that means that the entire war on terrorism is a fraud, like those posters said. That means that we have been lied to. We've basically been tricked into war. We've been tricked into a global war, which is we see in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Somalia, in Yemen, in many countries in Africa and Asia, and that we have all been duped. We've all been tricked into it. The world has been tricked into it, not just the American people, but we've all been tricked into it, and that we have to accept it as like the new zeitgeist. The new zeitgeist is that we will be waging war against Islam, Islamic terrorists, anybody who's involved in any way. But when you consider that 9/11 appears to have been a false flag terror attack, that means a false flag terror attack is that somebody committed 9/11, the act of 9/11, the terrorism, but the blame was put on Osama bin Laden. So in that way, you can make a war against anybody you want because you simply can fabricate the event and then say, they're guilty, now we go to war. And this is the way the United States and the West have been fighting wars for a long time. But particularly you saw it in the Balkans, you saw it in Syria, you saw it recently in Ukraine. You see that provocations and atrocities are created in order to excuse military action by a noble Western country against a barbarian power. Like they blamed Serbia, now they want to go to war with Russia. And the modus operandi is false flag terrorism. We see, of course, airport security and the government intrusion to our private communications. And that's what we're living with today in a state where the government has complete power over you, and if you challenge it in any way, you are an enemy of the state. The drones, and what this means is that the United States is effectively waging war illegally in countries all around the world, and that because Sweden has changed so much, and that Sweden has very close ties to the United States, Sweden and Norway and other countries have been brought along, and we're engaged in illegal wars of aggression. History will tell us that the war in Iraq was completely contrived. There were no weapons of mass destruction, and that means that the war in Iraq is a war of aggression. And obviously, if 9/11 was a false flag terrorism attack, and if Osama bin Laden and the Afghanis had nothing to do with it, then the war in Afghanistan is also a war of aggression. Obviously, this has affected the lives of thousands of people, Americans, Canadians, Scandinavians, not to speak of the millions of people who have been affected in the region, Iraqis and Afghans. Okay, let me have a sip of water. For this reason, it is essential that we understand whether what happened on 9/11 is true or is not true. And if the war on terror, if 9/11 is a fraud, then the war on terror is a fraud. That means that everything that we accept today as political reality is a fraud. So we've been lied to on a huge scale. And one of the most interesting things is that they just opened a museum in New York City about 9/11. And it was, this is Bloomberg, Mayor Bloomberg opened this museum. And it is basically only there to institutionalize the official story about what happened on 9/11. To this day, the American media does not even accept that the official version has been proven wrong. So that means that our media is supporting, the media and the government are working together. It really, it's the tail is wagging the dog or whatever, but that the media is presenting the official lies as reality. That's the only reality. So it's not unusual that in an event like this, there will be no media. No media will come to an event like this. They don't acknowledge that there is any truth of 9/11. They say that the government said this is what happened, that's what happened, end of story. Even though the evidence clearly indicates that the US version, the media version of 9/11 is false. It's completely false. The buildings cannot fall like that. We have evidence of thermite. Osama bin Laden didn't put thermite in the building. So if there's tons of thermite in the building, how did it get there? Who did it? Now, these are the kind of questions that you have to read my books or do a lot of research, but to find out. And what there's right now, what's going on is that there's a great deal of misinformation, disinformation, if you will. I just wrote an article just yesterday, 2 days ago, about Veterans Today, which is a pretty respected website. But the man who runs this website is basically saying that nuclear bombs were used in the World Trade Center. This is one of the, what I call red herring. They say, one lady says that there were space weapons, like directed energy weapons aimed at the building, and this caused the pulverization of the building. Her name is Judy Wood. Another theory is this theory that there was nuclear bombs in the building, and the pulverization of the towers was caused by a nuclear reaction. And in this article, this man, Gordon Duff, who runs Veterans Today, he said this comes from Russian intelligence. He says this latest revelation comes from Russian intelligence. And I looked at his article, and his article is full of lies. Not lies, incorrect statements. It's just full. So you say, well, why is this man who has a patriotic website for veterans, why is he telling the people that there were nuclear bombs in the World Trade Center? Because his real message in that article is that there was no thermite. The evidence of nanothermite is he says that was created by the nuclear blast. He says when the nuclear fusion reaction occurred, it created this iron oxide, which is what he calls thermite. Well, that's nonsense. Iron oxide is rust. That's not what was found. And a nuclear reaction did not produce that material that I showed you. So I'm just telling you this so that you can be aware that there is a great deal of disinformation. Our governments are not telling us the truth, and there are other people in the alternative media who are telling you stories. So you have to use your own critical thinking. You have to, what I present to you, what I've shown you, what I tell you is based on facts. And those are facts you can check for yourself. That's what you have to do. But most of us are actually, we don't have the time to read the papers, the 25-page paper about thermite. We want to have the quick and easy answer. But there is no quick and easy answer because you have to do the reading, you have to understand that you're being lied to from all different directions. So you have to use your critical thinking to figure this out. So let's just take a little break, and I know there's some food back there, and after you take a little break, there's books and materials that you might be interested in. Then we can take some questions, and I think that you probably have questions that you would want to ask, and that's where we get the good give and take. So let's take a little break and come back in 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes. I have been writing about 9/11, investigating 9/11 since the day it happened. As I said, my wife and I and my children, we were coming from Vermont. We were passing through New York City. It's a very interesting little story here. We were driving past Manhattan at 2 o'clock in the morning on 9/11. On the day of the event, we had been up in Stowe, Vermont. I was supposed to go back to Washington, D.C. I was a day late. We usually live in Chicago. That's my hometown. I was working at home. And as we drove, it was very late. The kids were sleeping in the back seat of the car. And my wife, as we were driving down on New Jersey, right past Jersey City, which is within eyesight, the Twin Towers just across the Hudson River there. To keep me awake, my wife was telling me about a dream she had the night we left Chicago. And that dream was that we were driving towards a city with a huge skyline, like New York City. And a plane was coming and attacking us from in front. And as we drove, this plane was coming at us, and about 50 meters in front of our car, the plane went into the ground, and she turned around, and this is in the dream, and she saw the plane come back out of the ground and swirl around again to attack us again. And she's telling me this dream on the morning of September 11th at about 2 o'clock in the morning as we're passing Manhattan. And this is the kind of very interesting kind of clairvoyance that you sometimes, people are able sometimes to sense something in the ether. There's something in the ether. And I begin my book with this because it's called The Dream. This is a very, very interesting thing. My wife was picking up, as Helge in the back there, she was picking up something in the ether. But this, we don't know how she did that, but this is a very interesting thing. But now if we had been just driving a few blocks to the east, if we had been going through Manhattan, you don't drive through Manhattan if you don't have to, because you have to pay a lot of money to go on the bridges and the tunnels. Every bridge costs $10, every tunnel costs $10, so you drive around Manhattan. But had we been there, we would have seen that there were trucks. There were trucks leaving the World Trade Center at 5 o'clock in the morning. As we now know, there were three large vans who were at the World Trade Center in the morning. And this is about Building 6. I just want to mention one little thing about Building 6. That's the U.S. Customs House. Now, the Building 7 that fell down, the big 47-story building that fell down at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, that was full of federal agencies, the CIA, the FBI, IRS, Drug Enforcement Agency. All of those agencies were in that building. And they were investigating very, very serious crimes, like Enron, gold scandals. In America, we had in the 90s incredibly huge scandals where billions of dollars were being stolen. And as I said, even cases were even brought against the President Clinton for being involved in drug smuggling. Well, we now know that Clinton has a history of being involved in drug smuggling, even since the time when he was the governor in Arkansas. But these huge crimes had not been prosecuted. And the evidence for these crimes was in the basement of Building 6. Because Building 7 had no basement, it was built on top of a power plant. All of the evidence for these crimes was kept in Building 6, in the vault, in the big vault. Now, we also know that there was a FEMA videographer named Sonnenfeld. First name Sonnenfeld. I forgot. Kurt Sonnenfeld. Young guy from Colorado. He was the FEMA videographer. So on 9/11, he was called after the first plane hit. 5 minutes after the first plane hit, he got a call from his boss in Colorado. Said, "Get on a plane, go to New York. You got to go and cover this event." And he was the official videographer for FEMA. And he went around with his camera, and he went everywhere. Only him. And he went into Building 6, And that's the building I showed you with a huge crater. Now, it's a 6-story building, but the crater goes down like 10 floors. It goes into the basement. It goes into the sub-basement and the sub-basement and the sub-basement. It's a very strange thing. This 6-story building was exploded, hit by a missile or something, exploded, before either tower fell. And firefighters, there's a couple photos of firefighters are spraying the building from the West Street. It's called West Street and Vesey on that corner. They're spraying. So a couple weeks ago, I contacted the New York Fire Department and I said, I just want the document that tells me what time you responded to the fire in Building 6. Just to give you an idea of the cover-up in New York. They won't give it to me. They will not. It's called an NFIRS document, it's National Fire Incident Reporting System. Anytime a fire department in America responds to any fire, they fill out a document. What time they started, who went, what time they finished, when they were cleared. Basic information, metadata, if you will. They won't give it to me. They said, oh, well, we know what happened on 9/11. This is a guy on the phone tells me from New York. Planes hit the building. For us, it's all like one big thing. No, it's not one big thing. What happened to Building 6? Well, that videographer, Kurt Sonnenfeld, who's now living in Argentina because the U.S. authorities want him, he went down into the basement of Building 6. He poked his camera down there, and he saw that the door of the vault had been broken. The security pad area was completely cracked. He looked in there, and he saw that the entire vault was empty. The vault is 15 meters by 15 meters. It's evidence and gold. All that was in that vault at any time was criminal evidence of very high cases and gold. Somebody had gone in, obviously, the night before September 11th, the night of September 11th, 10th to 11th, and cleaned out the vault. They took all that stuff out of there, and because he has this video footage still in Argentina, his wife was murdered, or his wife committed suicide, sorry. His wife committed suicide, and the authorities in Colorado said, it's a suicide, he didn't do it, but the U.S. government says, we want him, we want him. So luckily, Argentina has given him asylum. But the reason they want him is because he has evidence of part of the big crime. So I often refer to 9/11 as, if you know those Russian dolls called Matryoshka dolls. The Russian dolls, when there's a doll inside of a doll, inside of a doll, inside of a doll, inside of a doll. And you look at it and you say, oh, that's a nice doll. But you open up the top, there's a little one inside there. And you open up the top, and there's a smaller doll inside of each doll. That's what 9/11 is like. 9/11 is a crime inside of a crime, inside of a crime, inside of a crime. So when we just talked about the police state in America that they created and the war on terrorism, and this is just part of the crime. Another part of the crime is that somebody went in and stole the evidence, got the evidence out of other crimes, and took the gold while they were there too. And this is a question, who did this? And this is why Mayor Bloomberg was the mayor of New York for 12 years. There was supposed to be an election in New York City on September 11th, but because of the events of 9/11, they postponed the election a few weeks or a few months. But you remember, Mayor Giuliani ceased to be the mayor, and Mayor Bloomberg, the billionaire businessman, became the mayor of New York. And he got one term, then a second term, then he said, we'll change the law for a third term, and he was mayor for 12 years. Because during this time in New York, they had been destroying evidence the whole time. Because 9/11, the crime of 9/11 is a massive crime. And we have today in the United States of America, I just came back from Germany, made a little video in Germany called Why 9/11 Truth is the Only Option. And this video has been very, very successful. It's only 7 minutes long, been very successful. Thousands of people have watched it. People really like it because I say, if we have in the United States of America a government and media that refuse to even address the issues of what happened on September 11th, they refuse to even ask any questions about it. They refuse to even acknowledge that it's a problem. They say, we told you what happened, that's it. Now we're fighting a war in Somalia, we're fighting a war in Afghanistan, and that's end of discussion. We do not have a free media when the media refuses to ask any questions. Shortly after 9/11, a bunch of relatives from Boston came down. Many people were from Boston. They came to Washington, D.C. They came to the Capitol lawn in June of 2002. and they demanded to see their congressman. Hillary Clinton came out, and Richard Gephardt, and all these guys came out, and I was there. It was a lawn full of people, hundreds of people with signs, very sad people, pictures of their children, their husbands, their lost loved ones. And not a single camera from Washington media was there. C-SPAN didn't come. Washington Post didn't come. Nobody came. And I called C-SPAN. I said, why did you? This is the first time that 9/11 relatives have even come to Washington. They're demanding an investigation, and C-SPAN doesn't even come and cover it? This is the way it has been for 12 years. Now I said, my logic is this. If we have a government in the United States of America that refuses to investigate what happened on 9/11, then we have a government that's controlled by the people who carried out 9/11. Because the only people who are being protected, in the United States of America or in the world by the ongoing cover-up are the culprits, are the people who did this. Now this is a massive crime. And the thing is the people who carried out 9/11, they knew that the media would not investigate what they did. And they were right. How did they know that? Because they own the media. They own the media. And in America, we used to have, like when I was growing up, we used to have hundreds of newspapers owned by hundreds of families. Now we have 5 companies that own all the media in the United States of America. You have somebody like Rupert Murdoch. I met Rupert Murdoch once. When he first came to America, I was a skier. And I was a ski guide, and I skied with him. And I was asking about his recent acquisitions of the Chicago Sun-Times. You know, I was cross-country skiing in Colorado. And I was wondering, how is it that this man comes from Australia and buys up all the media in America? Maybe if any of you go to Germany, you'll know the same thing happened in Germany recently. Chaim Saban, an Israeli guy who made the Power Rangers or something, he went down to Germany and bought up a bunch of media. And usually Europeans are very careful about who they sell their media to. Germans too. Not with Chaim Saban. Chaim Saban just bought it up. ZDF, a bunch of companies, Sat.1, they belong to him now. Same thing happened in America. So we had basically 5 or 6 companies controlling all the media in the United States of America. TV, radio, newspaper. And none of them investigated 9/11. And so, for example, when they decided to go to war in Iraq, Rupert Murdoch had 160 newspapers that he owned. And every single editor of every single paper agreed on the need to go to war in Iraq. See, we have no diversity of media in America. So they knew that the media will not ask any questions about what happened on 9/11. And that's what's happened. So we have a situation where the media and the government refuse to acknowledge what happened on 9/11. They are actually continue to maintain the lie, even though we have known since 2009 of the evidence of nanothermite in the World Trade Center. Well, Osama bin Laden didn't put nanothermite in the World Trade Center. So the official story has been, the official version of what happened on 9/11 has been dead since 2009. Yet it's like a dead man walking. It keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going. So you say, well, how can this be? How can the Americans keep getting governments that keep maintaining the lie? Well, it's because we don't have a democracy in America. We have not had a democracy in America for a long time. What we have in America now is, as I told you about the voting machines, we have basically, in plain English, we have a crimocracy where the elections are controlled by private companies for the benefit of the people who run the elections to put criminals in power. So we have people like Bill Clinton. He's charming, he's nice, he's a ladies' man, people love him, but he's a criminal. When he was governor of Arkansas, there was a great deal of cocaine being brought into Mena, Arkansas. You maybe have heard the stories. That's all true. He was involved in drug smuggling. So there's this criminal element that controls America. Now we're being told, we're still 2 years away from election, but we're told that Hillary Clinton will be the next president, or Jeb Bush, as if there's only 2 families in America who become presidents. We can only have Bushes or Clintons. It's pretty soon it's be 35 years, and all we have is Clintons and Bushes. And you tell me, what is it about Jeb Bush that makes him presidential? Well, it's the same thing. I'm from Chicago. Obama is from my town, well, supposedly. But when I was living in Chicago, he never did anything. He was not known for anything at all. And suddenly, he got elected to the Senate because the candidate he was running against withdrew from the race. This is how Obama has always won his elections. He becomes the only candidate running. The other candidate dies, or the other candidate excuses himself because of, in the case of that election, some sexual striptease impropriety. And so Obama was running by himself. Well, as soon as he won this race where he was the only candidate, national public radio, which I call national propaganda radio, they came on the air and they said, oh, and he is so presidential. And I said, wait, he just came out of Chicago, he won an election against a nobody, and he's presidential? Then you see, that's how it works. So that the only people that can be elected in America are those who we are given. These bubbles rise to the surface. Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush. That's who you'll choose between. That's it. There is no grassroots political movement in America where they say, we like this guy. No, it's not like that at all. And because they control the election machines, 99% of the votes in America are counted by computerized companies. The last time they had an election in Chicago, I was there. I've been digging elections for a long time. The company that was running the elections, I went behind the scenes. It was a bunch of guys from Venezuela. And I said, I just came from Venezuela. You guys are counting the votes here? Yeah. They own the company. All the votes in Chicago, in Illinois, Cook County, where I'm from, were being counted by a Venezuelan private company, accountable to no one. So this is why we have governments and media that are accountable to no one. They treat us, the people, very much the same as you're treated here, as the third sector. We are simply like the cattle. We're like the cattle. We don't have to be explained anything to. If they want us to run that direction, they throw a bomb over there. The cattle all run that way. They want us to move in an intended direction, they throw a bomb that way. And this is the situation we're in right now. So you probably have some questions. I know some of you have some questions, and I want you to ask the questions now. If anybody have any comments or questions about anything, please ask. Please, sir.
I have a few things to say.
Sure.
But, one thing, I understand that you have left America.
Yes.
And you,
Yes.
I don't think it's much better here, though. We're usually just a few years behind.
Okay, very good point.
The
Yes.
problem is usually when you come too close to the truth,
Yes.
you are a goner.
Yes. Yes.
They
Tell me.
took care of one prime minister and one
Yes.
our justice minister, and I don't know when they're going to take care of you.
Yeah. Well,
Don't take
yeah, I know. I know. I've been chased out of 2 countries now. We had to leave America because I was malicious prosecution. Undercover police came to my house. 3 of them. They'd been going around my house for a couple days. This is back in 2006. This is just after we discovered the nanothermite. We discovered the nanothermite. My research indicated that that's definitely involved based on what I found in California and from Professor Jones. We were talking about it on the radio. Professor Jones was working on it. He was attacked. I was attacked. I was attacked first in my house in August 2006. 3 undercover police came to the house. I came out of the house. I said, who are you? What agency are you with? They knocked me on the ground. They tasered me, and they broke my arm and prosecuted me. They said, you attacked us. I just asked, who are you? Why are you coming to my house? Who are you? And then they criminalize you. You see, then you have to fight off the charges. In America, in Illinois, the way it works is that they say, you're charged with this and this. Now, you basically have to plead guilty to one of the charges. They give you an option. They say, okay, you can choose, you can plead guilty on this one, and we'll take the other one away. But you have to plead guilty. You have to plead guilty to something. And I said, I did not assault those men, and I did not resist their arrest. I called 911. They came, they beat me up, and oh, you want a trial then? Oh my God. Lawyers quit. They don't want to deal with this because trials are very uncommon in America, and it's very corrupt, very, very crooked. All my evidence was disregarded. I had hired an expert on police procedures to discuss. He was not allowed to talk. So they found me guilty of both charges. I attacked the 3 heavily armed men, they said, and I had resisted their arrest. Therefore, I faced a year in jail. And I was given 3 weeks before sentencing, and then you're at the mercy of the judge. But having seen that the process was completely corrupt, with no respect for the truth, I said I can't not submit my family to this trauma any longer. So we went back to Europe. We went to Norway. because you cannot put your children through this, your wife through this, you know. And then in Estonia, same thing happened. In Estonia, I discovered this. I don't know if you're familiar with ledde. This is this intelligence operation, which is very Zionist, trying to get Russian Jews to go to Israel. Well, I had discovered that this guy who handed the captain of the Estonia ship over to the Americans at a base in Sweden was Toivo Trema. Toivo Trema is a pastor in Livets Ord. His name was Toivo Trema. Toivo Trema. And he was a high-level American military intelligence agent who had been educated in their schools in Arizona and Texas and Virginia. And you see, what's happened in Estonia is that the U.S. military intelligence basically runs the country. And for that reason, when Helge and I, we were given this material, we found out information about what happened on Estonia the night that it sank, and afterwards, I published it, and then we were basically prosecuted in Estonia too. Same thing happened there. Police started following me everywhere I went. 3 meters behind me, everywhere I went, there's a policeman following me. And then they told Helge that, you know, we're going to arrest your husband, we'll take away his passport, and put him in jail for 3 years. Well, you don't want to be in jail in Estonia. You don't want to be in jail anywhere. You never, ever submit to tyranny and go to their jails unfairly. If you've committed a crime, do your time. But if you're an innocent person who's being prosecuted by these corrupt people, you never give in. Yes?
We did a separate event about Estonia. Because here in Sweden we have so little information about what really happened.
Yes, that's because Carl Bildt is the...
Another event.
Because Carl, yes, of course you do. But I may very well do that, but you see, we have really been burned by Estonia catastrophe. We had to leave Estonia in the middle of the night. We just had to pack the bags and get out. Because that's the thing, it's very traumatic. But, you know, in Sweden, when you talk about Estonia in Sweden, it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous. It's dangerous what I'm talking about 9/11, but 9/11, I'm an American. Swedes have a lot of respect. I give Carl Bildt this much credit that he says that you have freedom of the press here. When the Israelis were involved in that organ smuggling and things like that a couple years ago, and some journalist in Aftonbladet wrote about it, Carl Bildt said, "No, I will not give in to you, Mr. Netanyahu. We have freedom of the press in our country, and we respect the right of people to say what they think." For me, that's it. Wow, that's great. I'm in the right place. I'm in the right place. And so I think that Swedish people are very fair. They have an innate sense of fairness. They're very polite, and they're very intelligent. And for that reason, and they're not violent. And I've had too much violence in my life to, you know, I'm afraid to go back to America, really, because it's getting more and more violent all the time. And there is nobody that stops the police or the government from killing people. They just kill people. And that's what they wanted to do with me, I'm sure. They wanted to put me in the Cook County jail because then they would have done what they often do, is that they get somebody to beat the hell out of you. Beat the hell out of you so badly, you never think again. There's an $8 million man, an $8 billion man, Alan Stanford, a big, tall guy from Texas. Maybe you remember his bank went out of business. He owed $8 billion, disappeared from Antigua and Texas. They put him in a private jail in America. And this big, strapping 6'6" cricket player was beaten bloody. He was just beaten bloody. Then the judge says, "Oh, well, now you got to give him medications." They gave medications. And then 6 months later, the judge said, "Well, now his brain is gone. We can't have any trial anymore." You would think that for $8 billion, they would protect the man to find out where the money is. But they don't want to find the $8 billion. Just like with Madoff. They don't want to find where the money went. They know where the money went. They don't want you to know that. But I think Sweden's a good place to be right now. Yeah?
I have a couple more things. Short thing about you said about the president of America. He is elected, but that is not correct. He is still elected.
Exactly.
And I have no illusions that it will be different in Sweden.
Yeah.
Then, one thing I'd like to mention is Aron Rassol.
Yes.
I'm sure you know about him.
Yes, filmmaker.
Would you like to say something about him?
Do you mean the filmmaker the late filmmaker who died?
Yeah. He was suicidal. slide.
Yeah, I don't know. I know some of his stuff. It's been a long time, but I can't say anything about him. I just don't have it in my head right now.
You mind
Sorry.
me doing it?
Go ahead.
Well, try short. He was invited to become a friend of Nikola Rockefeller.
Of who?
Nikola Rockefeller.
Okay.
And he was kind of told, "Oh, come and join us, and we'll help you out with everything, you know."
Right.
We'll give you a KMA card, for instance. KMA, what is that? No, it's a Kiss My Ass card. You have that one, they stop you in a speeding or whatever, you just show the card and you can go.
Mm-hmm.
But he reflected back after all these events that you've been talking about,
Mm-hmm.
that actually he declined this friendship with Rockefeller.
Yeah.
He realized that 9 months before 9/11, he
Mhm.
was told by Rockefeller that
Mm-hmm.
there was going to be a big event
Mm-hmm.
that was going to, as I understand, change the world.
Right.
And after that, we're going to a war with Afghanistan and Iraq, and then
Right.
we're going to have a war on terror, but it's all a fake, it's all
Right.
bullshit. But that's what's going to happen. And not until after all these incidents, he realized, well, that's what he was talking about.
Exactly. Exactly. It's the same.
If anybody's interested, Aaron Russell, just check on YouTube or whatever.
Aaron Russo, R-U-S-S-O, Russo.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like the big general who was in the Pentagon after 9/11, and he talks about, you know, he was a former chief of staff of the military, Kana, and he heard this. He said, yeah, and we're gonna do like 7 countries. He lists them off. Boom, 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 and then we're going to do this and this and this, and that's exactly what's happened. That's exactly what's happened. There's this war agenda. I sometimes refer to it as a Zionist war agenda because, for example, the Zionists have an agenda of war, if you will, and like when the United States went in and destroyed Iraq, as they destroyed Iraq for a period of at least 21 years, from 1990 to 2003, 20-year war against Iraq. First, a punishing war against the country, then extremely punishing sanctions, in which something like 1 million children died. And when the U.S. Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, was asked, you know, 500,000 kids have been killed by these sanctions. Do you really think, is the price worth it? And she said, yes, we think it's worth it. Well, Iraq happened to be the most powerful Arab foe of the State of Israel. Whenever some Palestinian kid would go do a suicide bombing or something like that, Saddam Hussein would send $25,000 to the family. So, I mean, some kids would do this just to get the money for their families in Gaza. So, you know, it's terrible. It's a terrible, terrible thing. But whenever the Israelis are pushed to make peace, they react with something. And when 9/11 happened, the Israelis were being pushed towards peace. They were being pushed, being pushed. And there was some real movement towards peace in the Middle East. Then 9/11 happened. All of that went to hell. And Iraq was the country they really wanted to go to first. But for some reason, probably because of leaked information, they went to Afghanistan first. But the real target, of course, is Iran. They want to surround Iran, and they want to wage war against Iran. And they don't pretend that this is not their idea. Benjamin Netanyahu comes to the United States and speaks to the whole Congress and says, we have to go to war with Iran. We want you to do it. And congressmen get up there and applaud crazily. Yeah, let's do it. I mean, this would be World War III. Well, they didn't get that war yet. They didn't get the war in Syria they wanted. Now they're fomenting a war in Russia. It's like, has this world gone mad? And everybody knows that in the Ukraine, the so-called revolution in Ukraine was completely an American product. You had the Assistant Secretary of State, her name is Nuland, Victoria Nuland. You remember the leaked telephone call when she said F you about the European Union? What she said about the European Union, F you, that's not important. It's what she said before that. She said, yeah, Yats will be the guy. Yats is the guy we want to run the government. Not Klitschko, not the boxer, not the other guy. We want Yats. That was 2 weeks before the government fell. 2 weeks before the massacre of the February 21st, 22nd, when all the people, snipers were being, but the snipers were shooting from behind in the hotel. They were shooting from behind. That means it's a false flag operation. They blamed Yanukovych. But the shots are coming from behind. That's not Yanukovych. That's false flag terrorism. Well, how is it that an American Secretary of State is dictating who will be the new government in Ukraine, and that's who becomes the government of Ukraine? And I know in Sweden you're taught that Russia is a dangerous, big country. We have to be fearful of Russia. That's what they're taught in Estonia. That's what they're taught all across Eastern Europe. In all the countries in Eastern Europe, like Estonia, where the Estonian people are taught and told, you can't have relations with Russia anymore. You have relations with New York, with London, with Stockholm, with Tel Aviv, but nothing with Russia. So they actually tore up the track between Tallinn and St. Petersburg. They teach the people in Estonia that Russia's the big bear. He's going to do something to you. Russia in the Ukraine has only tried to stabilize a situation that was made terribly unstable by the US Revolution. And they're trying to create a war, and people are falling for it. Yes?
Yeah, Chris, a couple of things regarding Newland. I guess Joe Biden's son is now the CEO of a big Ukrainian oil company. I was one this wee thing. But I wanted to ask you, was there any movement about the Mossad agents, the 4 Israelis on 9/11 that were witnessed filming?
Oh, yeah.
You know anything more about that? That seemed to have dried up after they were interviewed in Israel.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story. He's talking about the dancing Israelis, we call them. On 9/11, there were these 5 men who were seen as the World Trade Center was burning across the river. These men were like dancing and high-fiving and clicking the lighters, like, hey, yeah, we did good. And behind them, 2,000 people are being cooked alive. And that's very bad taste to do something like that. And when you're surrounded by, the lady saw them and she called the police. The police came, and finally, at noon, when we're driving on September 11th, we're driving back to Chicago. We're going through Pennsylvania. Ted Koppel comes on the news and says, yes, this is Ted Koppel. And, FBI is looking for 5 Middle Eastern men who were seen videotaping and celebrating the burning of the World Trade Center. And Middle Eastern men, Well, it turns out they were arrested that afternoon. They were Israelis. And their van was pulled over. It was one of these moving vans. They were working for this Mossad company called Urban Moving System, which was a front company. The van tested positive for explosives. They had thousands of dollars tucked in socks. They had duplicate passports. And they had box cutters, all the stuff that they needed. And they had been at the World Trade Center that morning. Well, it turned out that these men were, as I said, 2 of them were Mossad agents, and the other 3 were operatives. And that was not, it ceased to be a story at that point. It was only reported in a local paper in New Jersey, and that was the end of it. New York Times didn't touch it. Mainstream media didn't touch it. It was one of the first stories I wrote about. I spoke to Paulo Lima. These men then went back to Israel and were interviewed in November of 2001 on the Yair Lapid show. Yair Lapid, he's a big politician now. And they said on the show, yes, you understand that our country is a victim of a lot of terrorism. We were there to document the event. They said that in plain Hebrew. We were there to document the event. So this is just one of those things that indicates that Israeli intelligence knew something was going to happen. They knew something was going to happen. They said they warned the American people and all that. But ever since then, and what we did, we also knew that on September 11th in the afternoon, an LL 747, when no other planes could fly, the Department of Defense gave them the clearance to fly to Israel. So it was full of Israelis going back to Israel on September 11th. And we also know one of the most important things I discovered, I think it's very important, is that Ehud Olmert is the Prime Minister of Israel who has now been sentenced to 6 years in jail for bribery. He may start jail time September 1st. But he was in New York City on September 10th, 2001. I found that in the sports page of the Jerusalem Post, because he was there negotiating the sale of the Beitar football team, soccer team, Beitar, which is the Likud's football team in Jerusalem. He was involved in a transaction reported on September 10th in New York City. Now, what's strange about this is this is the deputy prime minister of the state of Israel. He's also the mayor of Jerusalem at the time, which is the sister city of New York City. So when a person of that stature comes to New York City, it's usually front page news. On this particular time, September 10th and 11th, it was not reported at all. Only in the Jerusalem Post sports page. So it was completely, although Giuliani knew, the FBI knew, US government knew, they all agreed that we will not talk about the fact that Ehud Olmert is in New York City on September 10th and 11th. So the question is, what was he there for? And why was it being kept secret? That's a very important question. Yes?
I actually have two questions for you.
Yes.
Do you have any additional information about the stand-down order of the military aircraft that was ordered to stand down? Also, do you have any information about the Bin Laden family being flown out from the United States the same day?
Yeah, I know that a lot of the Bin Ladens flew out the same day as you said, because the Bin Laden's a very big family, and they left. About the stand-down orders, it's very weird. I don't know about the stand-down orders per se, but we know that the U.S. military was completely unable to send any planes to the World Trade Center before the second attack. It makes no sense because they were flying from Massachusetts. They were flying very fast. They should have been there, but they were apparently misguided in a way. Very much like when we talk about what happened to Flight 370. The American military was unable to make any response at all. And this is very important to understand that they were doing big games that day. Many big games, and these games simulated hijackings. Exactly. One of the games even simulated a plane being flown into the Pentagon. Well, not the Pentagon, but in the National Reconnaissance Office in Chantilly, Virginia. They were doing a drill. The National Reconnaissance Office is the agency in the United States government that operates the spy satellites all around the world. And it works for the Department of Defense and the CIA. And they operate a whole network of spy satellites that watch over the whole world. And on September 11th, they were doing a drill. When a plane was going to be taking off from Dulles Airport, which is a few miles away, the plane was going to take off and crash into their building. That's the simulation. But when the reality happened on September 11th, what did they do? They sent everybody home. They said, everybody goes home. Only a skeleton crew remains. Why would they do that? Very odd. So all the people who man America's satellites on September 11th around the world were sent home. Just another thing. Yes?
I'm wondering, what's your theory about which kind of elements in the government that knew about 9/11?
Yeah.
Who's involved?
Yes.
You think Bush was involved?
Yes.
Do you think he knew about it? You
Good.
think it's like the military?
Very good question.
FBI or whatever?
Very good question. When we talk about 9/11 being an inside operation, an inside job, I say it's an inside job in the same way that a tapeworm is inside you. It's a parasite. Obviously, the American people, the American government doesn't kill thousands of its own people because they want to have a war in Afghanistan or Iraq. If they want a war in Afghanistan or Iraq, they just go do it. They don't need to kill thousands of people. All of my research indicates that it was an operation that was done by a group of people who have very devoted ties to the extreme right-wing element in the state of Israel. This is the Likud party. This is Ariel Sharon's party. This is Menachem Begin's party. I was living in Israel when this party came to power in the mid-70s. When Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir came to power, you now knew that you had real thugs running the government. And the usual Israelis who are Labor Party people, for them this was a heartbreak. They said the terrorists have taken over our country. And people that are not Israeli or familiar with Zionist history don't appreciate what happened. But when Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir took power, Yitzhak Shamir is the guy who killed Volker Bernadotte. To bring this up to today's reality, Rahm Emanuel, who was the man who ran Bill Clinton in the White House and became chief of staff under Obama, Rahm Emanuel from Chicago, his father was a member of the Stern gang involved in the murder of Volker Bernadotte. That means that a son of a terrorist, the son of a real terrorist, was chief of staff of the United States of America. You see, people don't understand what that means, but these are extremely radical people. They come from revisionist Zionism. They come from the Jabotinsky school of Zionism. The Jabotinsky wrote, we have to build an iron wall. Everything was iron. If you look at what the Likud does, everything is iron brain, iron wall, iron fist. Everything's iron. And they built the iron wall. Ariel Sharon built the iron wall across Palestine. Today, you know, Bethlehem is surrounded. Kalkilia is surrounded. The West Bank is like Berlin, except the wall is twice as high and 4 times longer than Berlin Wall ever was. And the world, duh. But these are the people who took power. In the United States of America, we had the man who oversaw the non-investigation of 9/11 is Michael Chertoff. Michael Chertoff was the assistant attorney general under Ashcroft. He was responsible for the investigation of 9/11, the investigation that never happened. There was no investigation. He allowed the evidence to be destroyed. He's the guy who gave us the Patriot Act. He then became the director of Homeland Security. He then gave us all these TSA. He then sold us, he was the agent who sold us the machines that we all get x-rayed at. So I mean, his mother was a Mossad agent. His mother was involved in Operation Magic Carpet when they snuck all the Yemeni Jews to Palestine in the late 40s. And they did the same thing in Iraq. You know, in Iraq, there was a large Jewish community that didn't want to go to Palestine. You know what they did? They blew up their synagogues. Mossad. Mossad, what Mossad stands for, Mossad Aliyah Bet. Mossad was an immigration agency. Mossad was the agency to stimulate illegal immigration to Palestine. That's how it started. And so because the Iraqi Jews were very happy living in Baghdad, they didn't want to go to Palestine. They had to stimulate them. So like I said, if you want the Iraqi Jews to leave Baghdad, make living in Baghdad difficult for them. Ariel Sharon was prime minister of Israel at the time of 9/11. Ariel Sharon believes, firmly, he believed that American Jews belonged in Palestine, belonged in Israel. French Jews, he would go to America, he'd speak to American Jews, he'd say, you shouldn't be living in America, your place is in Israel. American Jews say, well, yeah, sure, right. Well, if you want those American Jews to go to Israel, but they don't want to go, what do? You make life very uncomfortable for them in America. So, unfortunately, Zionism often creates anti-Semitism. They create it themselves because anti-Semitism makes life uncomfortable for Jews. They say, yeah, maybe we should go to Israel. You see? So, 9/11, if my information came out on a larger level, many Zionist Jews in America would be very uncomfortable. They will be very uncomfortable if the truth comes out. Well, what is their choice then? Go to Israel. And unfortunately, the people who run Israel today are maximalist extremists. Mr. Netanyahu is a good example. And the man who ran the Pentagon, the money man at the Pentagon, was a Zvi Dov Zachan. Dov Zachan, he's a rabbi. He oversaw the Pentagon budget. If you remember, there was a great deal of money missing from the Pentagon budget that was discovered on September 10th. Billions and billions and billions of dollars were missing. Well, if you're running the Pentagon budget, you can put money into black operations here or there and nobody knows the difference. This is what we talk about. When we talk about inside operation, we talk about people who are serving another government but are inside the US government. As my wife will say, you can't have two loyalties. You cannot be a patriotic, loyal American and a patriotic, loyal Israeli at the same time. At some point, you have to decide, oh, I'll do this for Israel today. You see? And something like that happened on 9/11.
But do you think they control like elections and stuff like that as well? Or
Yeah.
do you think that's like a separate
Yeah, no. The U.S. political party system is completely controlled, and it's controlled by the same people who pulled off 9/11. I don't know exactly all people, but our political parties are controlled, our political elections are controlled, our media is controlled. Everything's controlled. So it's and same thing in Britain. Same thing in Britain. Every British prime minister has a handler who is like his liaison between him and the Rothschild family, the people who put him in power. And that's why British politics is also so corrupt. Yes?
What's the main motivation, do you think, then, or end game, if you will, of it all?
The end game is war. The end game is war. It's perpetual and more war, and more war, and more war. And this is why it has to be stopped. This is why we have to stop it. That's why I'm still talking about it. Because as we see, in 1991 there was supposed to be a peace dividend. We had reached some sort of peace with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was no longer a threat. So in America they were talking about a peace dividend. They said, now we'll have money for our schools. Now we'll have money to fix that bridge. Now we'll have money to build hospitals, Because Americans don't have very good support from the federal government at all. And as you know, American infrastructure is falling apart. Bridges are falling down, highways are falling apart. Nothing works. We have no train system. The federal government gives us very, very little back. Well, ever since 9/11, we've had war after war after war. Immediately after 9/11, the defense budget doubled from $300 billion a year to $600 billion a year. And it has remained at that level and increased ever since. So it's a huge amount of money. Now we're buying more boats, more submarines, more planes, and this just goes around. Like the family that brought Mr. Obama to the White House happens to own one of the biggest defense contracting companies, General Dynamics. They make the boats and the submarines and the planes and all that stuff. They own Aspen Mountain, Colorado. The Crown family, the real name is Krinsky family. And they support, like when the Israelis want America to go to war with Iran, they just talk to Mr. Crown. They say, Mr. Crown, you talk to Obama to get tough with Iran. We want a war with Iran. And unfortunately, the Americans are so, unfortunately, quite ignorant of world politics, and they believe that the government is telling them the truth, and they believe the media is telling them the truth, so it's very easy to stampede the Americans into a war. And but the Americans are completely fed up with war now. They see that this is a disaster. The country's falling apart, and all they do is fight wars. But as I said, they want a war in Iran. They want a war in Russia. This is not ending. And if we don't stop it, we will get a third world war. That's why it's so important. Yeah.
The only thing that America exports these days are guns.
Of course.
30% of the world trade.
Of course.
So it's just keeping the wars going.
Of course. You wonder if the Americans can't see a better way of life, but it is as you say. Yes?
How does the government benefit from all these wars?
Well, who's the government? Who's the government? You see, it's the government in America is, as I say, the state is nothing more than the group of people at the top in America. They benefit, as he said, Joe Biden's son has now got an oil company in Ukraine or something like that. But it's if you want to be in power in the United States, you need to have the approval of the media and obviously the political bosses. That means when Mr. Netanyahu says something, you applaud. That means that you never criticize Israel. That means that you never turn against a war. And so the people who turned against the war, there was a very good congressman, a senator in Minnesota, a Jewish guy, Paul Wellstone. He was against the war in Iraq. He didn't want to go to war in Iraq. His plane just fell out of the sky one day when it was coming in for a landing in Minnesota. Just went, he was supposed to come into the airport, just land straight ahead. Suddenly the plane just went left and crashed into the trees. And many people have happened like that. So in America, if you want to be a politician and if you want to survive, you support the war, you support Israel. Yeah.
The American ambassador to Sweden, that's Mark Brzezinski.
Yeah.
The son of Stig Brzezinski.
Right.
How come?
Yeah. Well, it's a small group of families.
What?
I mean, you have a question. It's a small group of families at the top. Yeah.
What do you think about Ron Paul and his son for?
Yeah, I sent Ron Paul my book. I sent his son my books because Ron Paul does not believe in 9/11 truth. Ron Paul does not disagree with what happened on 9/11. So we had an election, we had a fake election last time where we had a third-party candidate who supported the official version on 9/11. So, and his son is probably of the same mind, because questioning what happened on 9/11 is the most unfortunate, revolutionary thing you can do in America today, because the entire establishment is against you. But the evidence is on our side. So America is in a revolutionary position. It cannot go on like this. It's not sustainable. You cannot have a government that is telling lies and waging war based on lies when something like 70% of the American population doesn't believe the lie. How sustainable is that? It's like an earthquake waiting to happen. And you know, we never know what's going to happen. We never know what will happen, what the Pope might do, or what somebody might say. I wrote a letter to the Pope. I said, Pope, you know, why don't you just speak to the Catholic people and say that we have been deceived about what happened on 9/11? Just say that. If he were to do that, there would be an earthquake in world politics. But until somebody like the Pope or the President or somebody does something like that, you know, we have to suffer. We have to go on with this. Yes?
Just try to tie back a little to what you said before about Mideast and all this.
About what?
Mideast.
Yeah.
Brzezinski was mentioned here.
Yeah.
Zbigniew Brzezinski is the guy who is behind Obama, by the way.
Yeah.
What was it, in 1980 something? He wrote this book, The Grand Chessboard.
Yes, yes.
Where all this American geopolitics is
Yes.
going up.
Yes.
About Mideast, Iran,
Yes.
Russia, Ukraine,
Yes.
all these countries are mentioned there.
Yes.
So it's all set.
Yes.
Really.
There was the PNAC, the Project for a New American Century. They released a document in September 2000. They said that basically that the American military has to have supreme control of the whole world. The United States military has to control cyberspace, the oceans, the air, satellites, everything. They call that full spectrum dominance. And this was written. This was written by Victoria Nuland's father-in-law. His name is Kagan. It's one of those Khazarian Jewish names, Kagan. Donald Kagan was the project chairman. His son, Robert Kagan, is the husband of Mrs. Kagan. They wrote this document, and they said that we have to have this revolution in the American military complex, that Americans understand that we have to control the whole world. And in order to do that, we have to increase spending, and we have to invade Iraq, whether Saddam Hussein is there or not. Now, obviously, the American people aren't going to go for this, you know, just cough up all the money and, yeah, sure, let's go to war everywhere. So they said there has to be a catastrophic and catalyzing event to make this happen quickly, like a new Pearl Harbor. 1 year later, 9/11 happened, and it gave them everything they wanted. Now, this plan that they wrote up called Strengthening America's Defenses, something like that, it basically called for a war in Iraq without a reason. That is defined as a war of aggression. That is a war crime. That is what people were hanged in Nuremberg for, committing a war of aggression against Poland, for example. Yet in America, these people, they don't get any punishment at all. They conspire to have a war of aggression in Iraq, the media, the government, the Kagan family, and nothing happens to them. George Bush idles his time painting paintings. He didn't even go to the museum. They opened up a museum about 9/11 the other day in New York City. He didn't even go to the museum. It's his presidency. He's the man who was in charge. He didn't go to the museum. Why? Because he feels deep down that he has been very, very wrong. And he knows that. And he's ashamed. You got a question back there?
Yeah, I have a question about John Wertheimer and Stephen Walt published a book, The Israel Lobby, and also an article at the same time a few years ago. What was the impact of their article and the book? Has it
Yeah. Yeah.
opinion in the United States?
Yeah. Those guys, Mearsheimer and Walt, they printed this study at Harvard, I think, that basically says that the Israeli lobby has incredible influence in American political decisions. That's true. We all know that. That's nothing new. But when they came out and said it rang through the halls of Congress. It was considered important because these guys have big credentials. But I did see also recently, I think it was Mearsheimer or Stephen Walt was speaking, and he ridicules 9/11 truth. He ridicules 9/11 truth. You know, as maybe CNN would do. You see, the mainstream media calls me a conspiracy theorist. They say that we are, the architects and engineers, they say, is a conspiracy group. They say architects and engineers for 9/11 truth is doing what they do because they hate the government. This is ridiculous. But this is this is the struggle we fight. You know, when I had a little presentation like this in Jönköping, I went to the local paper several times. I gave them information, everything. And then when I went there before the event, they wouldn't even send an editor down to talk to me anymore. And I told them, I said, look, if you don't send just even a reporter to the event, it tells me one of two things. Either you don't think that the truth of 9/11 is important, or you're controlled. Well, I don't know. The Jönköping Post is a little family newspaper, but they completely disregard it. No coverage. I was lucky. Sweden Radio, Sveriges Radio, they did a little interview with me in Jönköping on program 4, P4. And they interviewed me and let me talk, made a very nice little piece, put it out on the radio before. And then within a few days, I was attacked by a group called expo.se, which said that, you know, Sveriges Radio lyfte fram en antisemit, something like that, that they had lifted me forward. And I wrote to the expo people, I think his name is Lehman, Jonathan Lehman, who made this accusation. And I said, Mr. Lehman, if you call me an anti-Semite, you must have evidence. You must have found something in my writing or my speaking that would tell you that I'm an anti-Semite. Please send that to me. I would like to know where you have this idea from. And secondly, if you don't, then you're simply repeating a slander that you've heard someplace else. And Sweden has laws about these kinds of things. You can't just go calling somebody an anti-Semite or a Nazi. And the guy at Expo Radio, I spoke to Mr. Pohl, he's the VD there. And he said, you're getting very excited. And I said, how would you like it if I called you a Nazi? How would you like it if I put all over the internet, Mr. Pohl is a Nazi, Mr. Pohl is a Nazi? You know, you have to put the shoe on the other foot. He didn't say anything to that. But that's what they think. They have the right to do that. They have the right to attack Christopher Bollyn, call him an anti-Semite, and that if you throw enough mud, some will stick, which is how it works. If you look in Google under my last name, which is a very unusual name, Bollyn, you will find many, many defamatory comments about me. Well, how does that work? So maybe this room would have had twice as many people, but those people went to the internet. Oh, who's Bollyn? Oh, no, we won't go. You see, that's how it works. If you throw enough mud at somebody, some will stick. It's an intelligence game. Any more questions? Oh, good, yes?
How do you look at the term New World Order?
Oh, New World Order. It's what Papa Bush wanted. It's the New World Order is that the United States and their allies will completely dominate the whole planet, and all of the resources of the planet basically belong to the guy with the biggest arms, biggest strength, and that's what we have. It's a frightful thing, but it's what they're trying to give us now. Yes?
What about the term Illuminati?
I beg your pardon?
What about the term Illuminati?
Oh, Illuminati. Okay. The Illuminati is a group of secret society based in Ingolstadt. It was tied to the Jesuits and all that. In general, secret societies, let's talk about secret societies, not just Illuminati. Secret societies are secret combinations of men who meet together. Like I think this is some sort of secret society at some point. I don't know, the Templar Knights, they have a little organization. But a secret society is when men get together and conspire, usually men, conspire behind closed doors. And what we have in America, if you drive to any American town, you're driving on the highway, you come to Welcome to Roselle. And on the marquee, the big sign as you enter the town, there are little icons of all of the various secret societies in that town. And there's like hundreds of them. The Odd Fellows, the Lions, the, B'nai B'rith. Well, what you find with this kind of thing with 9/11 is that you find people that are involved in the conspiracy to cover it up are usually members of a secret society. And secret societies are not all the same. Some secret societies allow all men, regardless of race or religion. Some secret societies only allow men from a certain religion. And some secret societies only allow certain men from a certain religion with a certain point of view. And that's B'nai B'rith. B'nai B'rith is the head of the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, also the head of Hillel. And B'nai B'rith, to be a member of B'nai B'rith, you have to be a Jew, but you also have to be a Zionist. When Zionism was becoming a big thing in the 40s, B'nai B'rith had an issue. They said, my God, what are we going to do? We have members who are anti-Zionist, and we have members who are Zionist. Because if you remember, Zionism was like a big thing in the Jewish community. People have to decide, do I side with Israel, or do I just not side with Israel? Then B'nai B'rith decided in the 40s sometime, we will be a Zionist organization. So non-Zionists are not welcome. But the thing is, how this works is like that Russian doll thing again. So you have men who belong to B'nai B'rith, who are Zionist Jews, who can also belong to any other secret society, because all other secret societies are open to all men. But it's a subset. So that you can, in this way, you can have a group of people with a certain political doctrine dominate all secret societies. You see what I'm saying? Secret societies are a bane of a democratic society. When I was in court, the judge was a member of the secret society, the clerk was a member of the secret society, the prosecutor was a member of the secret society. They're all members of the same secret society. What chance did I have? What chance do you have when they have sworn an oath, and the prosecutor, one of my supporters said, he said, you shouldn't prosecute Bollyn. I forgot why, you shouldn't, Bollyn didn't do anything. And the prosecutor said, I've read Bollyn's work, and he's anti-Jewish. The prosecution will go on. You see? And so it's like, I had offended a certain political group in the United States of America who controlled the court. And they said, we will prosecute. And so they threw out the evidence that didn't suit them. They found guilt where there was no guilt. They said, now we'll put him in jail, and then we'll have somebody beat the hell out of him. End of story. Yeah?
9/11.
Yes.
It's an inside job, it's a very common thing.
Yes.
And we can agree, I think, on that it was made up. It was a false flag thing.
Yes.
Who is behind it all? If you go really back into it.
Yeah.
Hinted it a few times here.
Who's behind it all? I don't. Yeah.
Unspeakable.
Well, it's not unspeakable. It's not unspeakable, but I can't. I said I wouldn't speculate too much today, and I can just, in my book, I talk about individual aspects of 9/11. For example, the prosecution. There were 100 families of loved ones who lost their loved ones on 9/11 who did not take the government money. If you remember, after 9/11, the government just basically had an open fund, and if you lost a loved one, they gave you money. They made a deal with you, $1 million for you, $1 million for you, $500,000 for you, $1 million for you. So most people said, okay, give me the money, and they signed off, they will not litigate. But there were 100 families that say, no, we want the truth. We don't want the government money. We want the truth to find out what happened to our loved one. And they sued. And they went to it was held all in the court of Alvin K. Hellerstein in New York City. Alvin K. Hellerstein is a Zionist. His son lives on the West Bank in a settlement. The real catch is that his son is a lawyer for the company that represents the company that screened the passengers on 9/11. If you remember, the people went through the checkpoints at the airports. Airport security has for a long time been in the hands of the Israelis in America. This company called International Consultants on Targeted Security, based in Holland, is a Mossad, an old Mossad El Al company. They give security to Europe, Schiphol Airport, Frankfurt Airport, everywhere these Israelis run security, since the 80s, if you remember. And the fact is that the judge, Alvin K. Hellerstein, is in New York. The number one defendant is this Israeli company tied to the Mossad, who oversaw the passenger screening that did or did not happen that day at Boston's airport. How did these 19 Arabs get on the plane with box cutters? How did this all happen? Do we actually have photographs of these men getting on the airplanes, et cetera, et cetera? We want to get answers to these questions. But what did Alvin K. Hellerstein do? He said, well, this Israeli company, it's just the parent company of the air, so we'll let them go home. You don't have to be here anymore. He dismissed the main defendant in the 9/11 tort litigation. And then every single family was bought off. I call it a judicial war of attrition. A war of attrition is when you just keep fighting. Then there's 99, then there's 98, 97, 90, and you wear them down. And they wore them down so that there were no more families. The last family was in Boston, the Bavis family, the hockey player. And by that point, the judge had narrowed down the case to such a fine degree that only one little question was being answered. So that's what I mean. Not only was there no investigation about 9/11, there was no litigation. In the most litigious society in the world, the United States is probably the most litigious society. They sue, they go to court all the time. Not a single 9/11 case ever went to trial. There never will be a 9/11 trial. Just like there was never a 9/11 investigation. So we've been sold a complete bill of goods based on nothing but what the government decided to say what happened that day. None of it's proven, none of it. What I've showed you today, I've tried to show you evidence and proof. And if you read my books, the original articles book is full of information. And that information is what supports the thesis in my book where I say it's the deception that changed the world. And that's what it is. Any more questions? Yes?
I've read that Jeb Bush has interest in a company that makes voting machines. Do you know if that's true, or do you have anything to say about that?
That's very likely. That's very likely. We see that, for example, Chuck Hagel, who's now the Minister of Defense in the United States, Defense Secretary, he was also involved in the voting company ES&S, Election Systems and Software, and he was elected with this stuff. He was elected by the machines that he worked for, you know, and now he's Minister of Defense, Secretary of Defense. So that's how it works. Anybody else? Yes, please.
You said before, change the world, you said, about
Yes.
this. What do they want to change, and what do you believe coming in the future?
Well, what they wanted to change is I told you, with the Netanyahu Institute had a conference in Jerusalem in 1979 where all the European and American leaders went, like Papa Bush went there. And the Netanyahu Institute was created by his father, Ben-Zion Netanyahu, who was the executive secretary for Jabotinsky before. This is revisionist Zionism. And in Israel in the 70s, they created something in Hebrew called terror neged terror. It means terror against terror. And then they just refined that a little bit to the war on terror. And if you read Mr. Netanyahu's books, like Terrorism, How the West Can Win, in 1986, he wrote that basically we have to get the Western democracies, all of them, to engage in a war effort against the terrorists and the countries that support them. So if you remember on 9/11, before the towers even fell, Ehud Barak, the Israeli prime minister, foreign minister, and most decorated soldier in Israel, was in the BBC studio in London explaining what happened before the towers even fell. So far, we just know that 2 planes crashed into the towers. He said, well, we know who's doing this. You know, it's Osama bin Laden, and we know where he is. And then the guy said, well, you can't be sure. Well, yes, we're sure. And now he ended it by saying, now is the time for a concrete war on terrorism. A concrete war on terrorism. That's how he finished that thing. So the Israelis, this is just like Carl built with the Bug Vizier. The accident has just happened. When it's a false flag terrorism, somebody has to come forward very quickly on a huge media presence and give a plausible explanation and give the desired result. Show the people, now, okay, you've all been shocked, this is what you need to do. And so, exactly as Ehud Barak said, George Bush did. The United States very quickly invaded Afghanistan, and this was all planned in advance. They had planned this, a long time in advance. They had meetings in Berlin with the Pakistanis and with the intelligence, and they had told the Afghanis basically this: you will either accept our carpet of gold, or we will carpet bomb you. What a deal. Well, and that's what happened. And so, but Mr. Barak, you say, well, how was Ehud Barak ready to give an interpretation, and his interpretation was the correct interpretation, or the one that was followed? And how is it he happened to be in BBC studios right there, right then? Who owns BBC? How does this work? That's the game. See, the media, our media is not there to inform us. Our media is there to manipulate us. You cannot say that the American media, the US media, serves the people in any meaningful way other than to misinform them. In Sweden, it's a little bit better, but not much. Not much. In America, we have very, very offensive television. They pound it at you. And if you don't agree with what Bill O'Reilly says, you are not a patriotic American. And so people are intimidated by this. You know, they come home from work and they listen to this guy and he's telling them what they have to think. It's Joseph Goebbels couldn't have dreamed of such a device. Yes, sir.
We haven't mentioned anything about the Oslo event. When,
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's kind of like outside the field, but I used to live in Norway, and it was a very, very interesting event, and I wrote a little bit about it. If you Google my name with Breivik, you'll find my articles. The most interesting thing I found about that was that he was being controlled. Mr. Breivik was being controlled by somebody called Fjordman, the Fjordman. And the Fjordman was kind of like his intellectual handler, kind of his provocateur. And Fjordman was a Jewish guy from the west coast of Norway, whose father was a member of the Communist Party. And Fjordman, I forgot his name right now, but Fjordman was basically acting as like an agent provocateur and pushing Breivik. And that's what I'm saying, you have to be very careful because the internet and these groups, organizations are full of people who want to provoke something. You see, I used to work with different people. I used to work with a guy named Eric Hushman in California. But then I saw that what they were basically doing at a certain point, they became provocateurs. They were calling for violence. They were engaging in anti-Semitism. And they say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Because you see, what they want to do is they want to associate you with that person then. You see, get somebody to work with Bollyn, give Bollyn a computer, give Bollyn some money. Bollyn becomes associated with this person. Then this person spins out of control. And Bollyn is taken down by association. So you have to be very careful. And it's the same thing with what happened with Breivik. I think Breivik was controlled, mind controlled in a way, to do the violent deed that he did. But the trial in Norway, to my knowledge, did not even go into Fjordman. Who was Fjordman, and was Fjordman at all responsible in instigation of violence? You see, like if you go to yahoo.com, for example, and just do an image search for Bollyn, the first image that comes up is a picture of me with a swastika carved in my forehead. And I took this up with Yahoo last week. I said, what kind of algorithm are you using that the first picture that comes up of me is an adulterated picture of me with a swastika carved in my forehead? How can that be? And they say, oh, yeah. But that is incitement to hatred. People that see a picture of Bollyn with a swastika from the movie The Glorious Bastards, they say, Bollyn, he must be a Nazi. Yeah, he deserves it. That's instigation of violence. That's hate speech. If I were to say or do something like that about it, they'd say that's hate speech. But when hate speech is applied to me, oh, no, that's okay. You see? That's how it works. So instigation of violence, I abhor violence. I think that I wish we could solve the problem of 9/11 in a judicious, proper way, find the guilty. We could easily do it. If there was a political will to do it, do an investigation, find the guilty partners, the guilty people, prosecute them, and put them in jail. And if we did that, we would defang the beast overnight. You know, it would mean that a lot of Israelis would be in jail. Mr. Netanyahu would probably be in jail. Ehud Barak would probably be in jail. Ehud Olmert is going to be in jail in September anyway. But, I mean, and George Bush would go to jail, Dick Cheney would go to jail, Chertoff would go to jail, etc., etc. But when you start arresting them, but what is this? This becomes like a Stalin purge. You know, how can you arrest all of the, this is how they did it in America, because the highest people were guilty. How do you prosecute the top prosecutor in the United States? How do you prosecute Ashcroft? It's not possible. They say brilliant. You cannot prosecute the Attorney General of the United States of America. So he's the guy who did it. I mean, that's how they do it. Question over here? Yes, sir.
As I said, we are in a war between factual information and deliberate disinformation.
Yes, very much.
Biggest problem.
Yes.
For sure. My question to you is, how do you think we proceed? How do we get the true factual information out?
The way you have to work, as we all have to work, is we have to use our own brain. We have to use our own power of critical thinking. That's why I said my presentation is just factual. You can check anything that I said. If it's not verifiable, I wouldn't say it. They took chapter 7 from my book, which is called The Architecture of Terrorism, in which I name all the names in this whole thing. A publisher in Estonia, he wanted to publish my book, supposedly. So he sent that chapter to a fact checker in Britain, an independent fact checker, who was completely against my thesis entirely. He said that. But he checked 105 facts. Not a single one was found to be false. And this Hans Louis said, well, congratulations, Chris. You know, the fact checker came back and you got, it's 100% okay. And I said, well, sure, what do you think? Do you think I'm making this stuff up? Before I put anything in the book, I had to check it like 3 different ways to make sure that it's absolutely verifiable. You know, for example, Ariel Sharon supposedly said to Shimon Peres, shortly after 9/11, Shimon Peres was obviously saying, Sharon, this is crazy. You know, this 9/11, this is crazy. The Americans are going to get, you know, Peres is a little bit more careful. Sharon said, Shimon, you're always telling me about the Americans. Forget about it. The Jewish people control the United States of America, and they know it. And we know it, and they know it. That was supposedly said on Kol Israel or something, a radio station, you know, and it was reported in a Palestinian newspaper or website. But because I couldn't confirm that, I didn't put it in the book. I couldn't confirm beyond a shadow of a doubt that Ariel Sharon said exactly those words. So I'm not going to put it in there because if you cannot verify it, if you put it in your book and it's wrong, then you destroy the product. So basically everything that's in my book is verifiable. There's a question over here? Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts on what happened at Sandy Hook?
Oh, Sandy Hook. Yeah, very strange, very, very strange thing. As I said, the United States is in a very bad situation right now. The United States has a criminal government that uses deception to fool the people all the time. People are killed, things like Sandy Hook happen. It looks very much like a false flag operation. It's extremely suspicious, but it's just one of many. It's one of many. And when maybe a journalist finds something out very interesting, like Michael Hastings in Los Angeles, he found out some very interesting stuff, probably about the NSA. And suddenly the FBI was calling all of his friends, and he put out a message on his Facebook or something. He said, like, the FBI is all over me now. He says, I got to go a little bit undercover for a little while. He wrote that like at 10 o'clock at night. At 3 o'clock in the morning, his Mercedes-Benz was burning as like a torch. And they had basically just, like they did with Jörg Haider, modern day cars can be hijacked just like planes. You know, increase RPM, decrease brake function, dead person. That's what they did to Hastings. So it's like, you know, when you have a criminal state like the United States is today, we can talk about the latest crime, but the latest crime was just yesterday. It's never ending. It's never ending. And instead of talking about its latest crime and the crime yesterday and the day before and the day before, we have to stop it. We have to defang this beast. We have to expose the truth and bring back some sense of honest government. If we fail to do that, we're going to live under a criminal regime. Yes, please.
You didn't answer the question, what to do to spread that information?
Yes. To spread the information. Well, I don't know. Any way you can. The best thing to do is if you have a network of friends, write to them, key them in, give them good information. What I'm trying to do right now is I call it information sharing. And I started this effort in Sweden only as a start to EGIT option. I told the people at Start to EGIT that I printed the books. Okay, I have the books going. But I want to do something called information sharing. I want to share the information that I have with people around me. Because there's a friend in Seattle that's doing the same thing. He goes out there by where the ferry terminals are, and he gives out information to people. Just any person, he just gives information. He tries to, because we try to inform other people that we care about, that we know, with what we know. We're a small group. But if the information reaches more and more people, it will bring a change. You see? And Sweden could be the catalyst to change this. Scandinavia could do it. But it requires a critical mass of people doing something. We can't just all sit back and pretend that we don't do anything. Yes, sir?
They can join our förening Cui Bono.
There you go.
We are working with this stuff many years and are spreading information.
Cui Bono, va bene. That's a good idea. Who benefits? I mean, the question in their Föreningen, who benefits? Just ask that about 9/11. Unfortunately, Mr. Netanyahu revealed himself twice. On 9/11, he was interviewed. On 9/11, the towers were just fallen. He was interviewed by Stephen Bennett of the New York Times. Mr. Bennett said, it's in my book, Mr. Bennett said, Mr. Netanyahu, how do you think that this 9/11 terror attack will affect Israeli-U.S. relations? Mr. Netanyahu didn't blink for me. He said, it's very good. He said, it's very good. He said, well, it's not very good, but it will strengthen our relations because now America has suffered a kind of attack that we suffer all the time, a great bloodletting. And then about a couple years later, he's speaking at Bar Ilan University, Hebrew University in Tel Aviv, I think. And he got up there and he said exactly like this. Israel is benefiting from one thing only. It's benefiting from the attack, on the 9/11 attack in the United States of America, and America's struggle in Iraq. Wait, that's two things, isn't it? The war in Iraq and the 9/11 attacks. But in his mind, it's one thing. But he said Israel's benefiting from one thing. He said it in Hebrew. It was reported in Haaretz newspaper coming from Ma'ariv. But it's documented. So, I mean, who benefited? Who feels wonderful about the Americans' war in Iraq? The American people don't feel wonderful about it. But Israel thinks it's wonderful because America is now fighting their war and giving them this strategic hinterland that they lack. You see? And America has built bases in Afghanistan and Iraq that are meant to last 1,000 years. They're meant to be there for a long time. And you see, this is what Israel tried to do in 1982. Remember, when they invaded Lebanon? I said, well, the Israelis can't hold that line very long up in Beirut. They're going to have to figure out some way to get somebody else in there. Exactly what they did. France, Italy, and America went there. And unfortunately, were massacred like slaughtered, you know? But that was the idea, because the Israelis can't have that force extension in Lebanon for years and years. They have to get somebody else to hold the line. So they snookered Reagan. Yes, question there? Do you have a question?
No.
Any questions? Yes, over there.
Are you ever afraid of being harassed or attacked by talking about this in Sweden? Or?
Well, I think I told you that Expo SE defamed me. They wrote to Swedish radio and said that you have lifted from an anti-Semite with no evidence at all. And I'm corresponding with these people, but the Expo SE doesn't think they need to offer me any evidence. And at least the people at Swedish radio are a little bit more. But if I had the money, I would sue them. I would sue that Expo SE for defamation of character, because I've read the Swedish law and it's very clear. And they're defaming me. But justice being what it is, that might not be a wise thing to do, because they might rule against me or something. I don't know. Yes, back there? Question?
You should see it as an honor to be attacked or burned marked by Expo.
Yeah,
we have many years experience of arranging lectures and all that, and the Swedish community. Oh, I dropped the line. But
no,
you should see it as an honor.
Yeah, I mean, I know it, but I don't like being lied about. And you see, it's just defamation is meant to bring me down, to reduce my credibility, and to reduce my importance of my work. So whenever somebody attacks you like that, you have to defend yourself, but you can only do so much. Yes, sir.
The Expo is financed by the Swedish parties in the Riksdag.
It's also financed by
the Swedish government of finance.
It's also financed by the grandson of the Red Banker, Olof Aschberg. You know, if Robert Aschberg. Yes, question here? Yes.
When we're talking about Israel's involvement and all this stuff, you know, Seymour Hersh's book, The Samson Option.
Yeah. Yeah.
How it seems so fantastical,
yeah.
But it seems more and more clear that this is kind of the way that they're pushing. It's
yeah.
to have their tentacles under and in everything.
Yeah.
That's happening.
Yeah. Yes. 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 I mean, one of the strangest things, you know, recently, I don't know if you followed the missing Malaysian plane, but I was very fortunate to get some information that an identical copy of that plane, an identical version of that plane, the missing plane, was mysteriously sitting in a hangar in Tel Aviv, although it had been bought by a little company in Florida, a George Soros company, for dismantling. This plane was now sitting in a hangar in Tel Aviv. And when I put out this images and this information, it was a huge article, because it may have prevented the Israelis from using that plane in a false flag attack. You see, right after the plane was hijacked, or right after the plane was missing, an El Al security guy and Mr. Murdoch both put out messages saying that, oh, we know where that plane is. That plane's probably in Pakistan or in Iran, and they're going to make a bomb out of it, and they're going to fly it into Tel Aviv. And they both said it on the same day. Mr. Murdoch in a tweet, and the El Al security guy in New Jersey in an article in Israel. Well, wait a minute. A missing plane suddenly in Malaysia suddenly is being transformed into a bomb in Iran, according to two very big Zionists. I said, beware, yellow flag guys. There might be something going on here. And then a week later, we found that the Israelis have an exact copy of the plane. Painted Malaysia Air, everything. So it may have prevented a false flag attack. And so that's one little thing you do when you share information. You try to inform people in order to prevent the bad guys from moving forward with their agenda. And we have to stop this war agenda. We were able to stop the war in Syria. We didn't stop the war, but we stopped the Americans from getting involved in the war, which would have been a much bigger disaster than it is right now. Remember, Libya was a bad disaster, but when the Americans got involved and NATO got involved, it got worse. Then you had Norwegians and Danes bombing Tripoli, for crying out loud. That's crazy. Any more questions? Anybody? Yes, sir.
Who do you think the last real president was, or when did the takeover actually happen?
John Kennedy. John Kennedy. There's no question about it. He was the last real president, and although it's very interesting, I'm from Chicago, and Kennedy was elected by vote manipulation, vote fraud. Nixon would have won the election, but Kennedy got elected by vote fraud in Chicago, and by Hollywood, a very, very strong Zionist group in Chicago who got him elected. And they say, well, why would the Zionists want to get a Catholic, an Irish Catholic, in the White House? You know, well, who was number two? Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson is a very strong Zionist. Lyndon Johnson was involved when Lyndon Johnson was a congressman. He was shipping bombs to Israel. He was also working with bringing in illegal Jewish immigration from Poland through Texas. So he was and you see, when Kennedy was killed, Kennedy wanted to break up the CIA. Kennedy wanted to restore real money, and Kennedy wanted to stop the war in Vietnam. As soon as Kennedy was dead, all of that was changed. We had a war in Vietnam. So from the time that I was in first grade until I finished high school, we were fighting this criminal war in Vietnam. So that's why they got him in power. Yes, sir?
What do you think about, I mean, in 2 years is going to be an election in the States.
Yeah.
What do you think about the former Minnesota governor, Jesse Ventura?
He has very little chance. Very little chance. He might be run, for example, as a third-party candidate, because nowadays the situation is so bad that they would do something like this. They'd give the Democrats Hillary Clinton, they'd give for the Republicans Jeb Bush, then they would give maybe Rand Paul, or they'd give Jesse Ventura as the third party. But I've been a member of the third party in America, and I see that it's completely controlled as well. It's just like a safety valve. It's like a steam valve, so that the patriotic people in America can say, here we have an option. We have this third party. We can go for that. But it never goes anywhere. It never goes anywhere. They don't even let the third party candidate be in the debate.
But do you think Jesse Ventura is a controlled opposition, or is he the libertarian that he says?
Yeah, I don't think he's controlled opposition or anything. I think he's a pretty good guy. I saw him on TV the other day where he said that there was very little steel at the World Trade Center. I would say wrong. Just like when I have nothing against Gordon Duff, but when Gordon Duff publishes an article on his big Veterans Today, which is a very big alternative website, and he says that there's no nanothermite. This is just a big nuclear bomb went off, y'all. It's like you're lying to the people. And I said, why are you doing this? Who are you serving? You see? So we have to be very, very careful about what information we accept as true. If you can't verify it for yourself, you know, Mr. Duff says, I have this information from my sources, but we can never show it to you. Well, what good is it then? Any questions? Anybody else? Yes, sir, here.
How do you look at the term ground zero?
The ground zero is, you know, of course, meaning like the place where the nuclear blast went off. I mean, it's the center of the devastation. But in 9/11, it refers, of course, to the place where the devastation was the worst. And the evidence indicates that clearly we have physical evidence of nanothermite. And this nanothermite that I showed you had more energy per gram than any known explosive. Now that's something to think about. At 420 degrees Celsius, those chips I showed you, when you heat those 420 degrees, they would blow up, they would blast, they would detonate, which is a very low temperature, and they would detonate with releasing more energy than any known explosive. So that's obviously an explosive. So I think that they must have put this stuff in the tower, inside the elevator shafts or something. They probably got some, I think I know the company who did it, it's in my book, but they hired some crew and they said, you spray this stuff on this wall here, you spray all this wall, and this is a rust proofing or primer or an asbestos abatement. You know, the workers don't know. They don't even speak English. They're just like from Ecuador or something often. Oh, spray, 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 spray. Just don't smoke, you know. Spray, 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 spray. And the stuff doesn't become really dangerous until it hardens. But then it's like if you covered this whole ceiling with that stuff, and then just put couple little detonating things on the wall, and then radio control say, okay, now we blow that building. You just hit the button. Those detonators go off from radio signal, and that entire nanothermite layer explodes in one bang. And well, this room would be gone, And I submit that the destruction we saw of the floors, the pulverization of concrete, and the absence of any metal pans. There should have been 110 metal pans full of concrete. If the government says we had a pancake truss collapse, well, where are the floors? Why did they all disappear like that? Where does the energy come from to pulverize a whole acre of concrete and everything in the building? It's just not possible. Another question? Anybody? Question? It's getting late. Thank you very much for coming. Oh, there's one question back there. I want to thank you very much for coming. I'm very heartened to see so many people, and this is a very important subject. So continue with your skepticism and sharing the information, because we deserve a better world than what we're going to have and what we have now. We cannot afford to have war after war after war, and nobody wants it. Nobody wants it. And when we realize we have been tricked into war, we have to say, enough of these tricks, and we want answers for the trick that got us into this war. Your question, then the last one. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.